Chapter 410. Qin Yuru did not expect that Di Yan would suddenly rush in and pull her out in front of so many people. When she came to herself, she was pulled to the door. She stretched out her hands and held the door frame tightly. With tears in her eyes, she said, "Cousin, they really misunderstood me. They thought that I had feelings for Prince Cheng, but I am engaged. How could I?" After saying that, she burst into tears as if what she said was true. "You're rebelling. You're rebelling. Pull her back." Old Madam was also shocked by Di Yan's rude action. At this time, she came to herself and slammed the table loudly. Immediately, several maids and old maids helped to pull Qin Yuru back, and someone went up to pry Di Yan's hands away. Countess Yong also stood up angrily and shouted, "Yan, what are you doing?" Di Yan's hands were pulled away by an old maid. He looked blankly at Qin Yuru, who was crying on the ground, and his eyes also turned red. He strode in and said to Countess Yong, "Mother, I don't want to marry this bitch." Slap. The heavy slap stunned everyone in the room. Di Yan stared blankly at Old Madam, who had always doted on him the most. For a moment, tears almost fell from his eyes. He managed to suppress the bitterness in his heart and said word by word, "Grandmother, is it true that only she and aunt are your relatives, while my father, mother, and I are not?" Old Madam's eyes widened. What are you talking about? Your cousin is also a victim." Old Madam was also stunned. She looked at her hands and trembled slightly. She had always doted on Di Yan, who was the future heir of Duke Yong's mansion. Naturally, he could not be compared with her other grandchildren. But just now, she actually slapped her favorite grandson. "Grandmother, why must I marry this bitch? Do you want to disregard the reputation of Duke Yong's mansion for 100 years? She has bad intentions, but she repeatedly implicates others. She was like this in the past and she is still like this now. Now, people in the capital city will say that she is not a good woman. She has an engagement, but she still seduces Prince Cheng. Grandmother, how can I face others?" Di Yan said angrily. He knew that it was actually an accident. A miss who went to Prince Cheng's mansion happened to fall and had to leave early. The one who went to pick her up happened to be her brother. On the way back, the miss told her brother about the interesting thing that happened in Prince Cheng's mansion today. After sending his sister home, this brother, who was also a good friend of Di Yan, told Di Yan about it. After hearing the cause and effect, Di Yan couldn't bear it anymore. He angrily went to find his mother, only to hear that his mother had already moved to Old Madam's place. When he arrived at Old Madam's place, he found that Qin Yuru was actually there. Not only was she there, but she also expressed so much innocence. Immediately, he had the guts to pull Qin Yuru out. "Yenta, this is not true." Old Madam tried to calm herself down. "What do you mean it's not true?" "It's true. Grandma, I'll say it here today. I want to break off the engagement. I don't want to marry such a woman. If you force me again, I'll leave this family." Di Yan straightened his neck and said angrily. After that, he turned around and was about to leave. "Come on, catch this evil creature." Countess Yong saw that the situation was not good and shouted hurriedly. Several old maids at the door immediately stood in front of Di Yan and did not let him leave. However, Di Yan was determined to leave this time. He forcefully pushed away several old maids and was about to leave. Several old maids pulled him and did not let him go. For a moment, the door was pulled back and forth. There were more and more beads hanging on the door. Di Yan stepped on a bead and almost fell down. This made him even more fierce. He suddenly shook off an old maid's hand and kicked another old maid. He was about to rush out of the door. He stopped helplessly when he saw Qin Huaiyong standing outside the door. Compared to the hostility on Qin Huaiyong's face, Di Yan's temper immediately subsided. When he was in Qin's mansion, Qin Huaiyong had trained him a lot. As soon as he saw Qin Huaiyong, he immediately felt his legs turn to jelly and his temper subsided. When Qin Huaiyong saw him, he did not say a word. He reached out and grabbed Di Yan's collar, directly pulled him in, and fiercely pushed him forward. Di Yan stumbled back a few steps and hit a table behind him heavily. He immediately bent over in pain. Countess Yong, who was beside him, hurriedly reached out to hold him and glared at Qin Huaiyong. If it were not for the dignity of a madam from an aristocratic family, she would have cursed him out loud at this moment. Qin Huaiyong strode in, bowed to old madam sitting in the first seat, and then to Countess Yong with a gloomy face. Then he raised his head and said, "Old madam and madam, please ask the servants to leave." He meant that he had something to discuss with them. Old madam was at a loss. When she saw Qin Huaiyong, she breathed a sigh of relief and hurriedly waved her hand. All the servant girls and old maids left. Countess Yong did not want to agree, but when she saw her mother-in-law had asked the servants to leave, she thought for a while and could only wave her hand. The servants who followed her also left. "You two go out first," Qin Huaiyong said to Qin Yuru and Di Yan with fierce eyes. They did not dare to say anything more. Qin Yuru wiped away her tears, stood up, and retreated to the door. She looked at Di Yan, who left with her to transport the coal. She called out timidly with tears in her eyes, "Cousin." This degree of gentleness was exactly the same as when she accompanied Xiaoxin in Duke Yong's mansion, but now it did not work. Di Yan, who had heard about what she did in Prince Cheng's mansion, hated her so much that he would not care about her kindness. He snorted coldly, turned around, and strode to the courtyard under the corridor, as if she was trash. Looking at Di Yan, who was far away, Qin Yuru became more and more anxious. Why did father come at this time? Did Qin Wanru complain to father? It should be okay. After all, she was father's only daughter. But these were not enough. She had to strengthen her power. By the way, Duke Xing's mansion. With Duke Xing's mansion, even if she did something wrong, Duke Yong's mansion would not abandon her. Thinking of what Xiaojie had said before, she gritted her teeth hard, nodded, and called Mei Shui. She whispered a few words, and Mei Shui answered and hurried to go out. When she lived in Duke Yong's mansion, she had done a favor to 1 or 2 servant girls. It was much more convenient for them to send letters and pass messages than in Qin's mansion. Coincidentally, she was going back to the mansion in a while. She could not wait. Originally, Xiaojie had not fixed the time she had set with her. She only said that she would inform her the next time she went out. But this time, she did not know when she could come out again. She could not wait any longer. If she did not have Duke Xing's mansion as a bargaining chip, she was afraid that things would be terrible. Moreover, if she did this at this time, she could make up for her ruined reputation. Qin Yuru's mind was full of different ideas. The look on her face suddenly changed from anger to complacency, and then to maliciousness, which made Di Yan, who was standing in the yard, more and more disgusted. At this time he regretted it. If he had known this, he would not have been so obsessed to agree to the marriage with his grandmother, and he would not have persuaded his mother. At this time, Di Yan even felt that it was better for Qin Yuru to die. At least, she would not ruin his reputation. He reached out and pressed his forehead, only to feel the blue veins on the fire fork between his eyebrows bulging. No, he absolutely could not give in today. He did not want to marry such a bitch. The two of them had their own thoughts and stood far away from each other. They were originally the closest fiancé, but now they were like the most disgusting people. When their eyes occasionally met, Di Yan could not hide the strong disgust in his eyes. At first, Qin Yuru looked timid, but then her eyes became sharp. She even raised her head and looked at Di Yan proudly. As long as she became the granddaughter of Duke Xing's mansion, Di Yan might not necessarily be her only choice. But at this time, she could only choose him. No matter whether he was willing or not, she had to make him accept this marriage. At this time, she could not break off the marriage. Finally, there was a sound in the room. Qin Huaiyong strode out and his eyes fell on Qin Yuru coldly. Qin Yuru could not help but shiver. Qin Huaiyong snorted at Qin Yuru, turned to walk in front of Di Yan, and said coldly, "Let's go, take me to see your father." "Yes, uncle-in-law." At this time, Di Yan also adjusted his mood. After taking a deep breath, he left with Qin Huaiyong. Countess Yong also walked to the door and looked at Qin Yuru through the broken bead curtain. Her eyes were fierce and disgusted, but then she tried hard to calm down the anger in her heart, reached out to lift the bead curtain, and waved to Qin Yuru in the corridor in a friendly manner. "You, come here, your grandmother has something to say to you." Seeing Countess Yong's expression, Qin Yuru was overjoyed. She hurriedly put away the thoughts in her heart, walked over obediently, and then followed Countess Yong into the main room. In the main room, old Madam was still sitting on the couch in the middle. Seeing Qin Yuru come in, she immediately waved to her. Qin Yuru hurriedly came over, took old Madam's hand, and wanted to kneel down again, but old Madam pulled her hard. Don't cry. This is just a rumor, and your aunt and uncle will not believe it. From now on, stay in the mansion, don't go out, and take good care of your mother. Right and wrong are in people's hearts, and no matter what those who don't abide by the female discipline say, it is false. Grandmother? Qin Yuru's tears fell down again. She wiped her tears with a handkerchief, turned to Countess Yong gratefully, and said, Aunt. Okay, as long as our family doesn't believe it, it's okay. From now on be good, and don't go out again. Countess Yong squeezed a smile on her face. Qin Yuru nodded gratefully, and for a moment, she choked with sobs. Old Madam's eyes also turned red, and she reached out to touch her head. Okay, don't cry. Since you have come to my home, this time you can leave after lunch. Chapter 411. It was very quiet in the pavilion, and only the sound of the cold wind came from outside the window. Inside the window, two people were playing chess. Shichi and Xiao Xuanzi stood beside their masters and watched their masters play chess attentively. Although they were eunuchs, they knew a little about chess after following their masters. From time to time, they changed their expressions from tension to relaxation or from relaxation to tension according to the changes of the chess game. There was Buddhist incense burning in the room, and the faint smell of sandalwood was very calming. Prince Cheng was a Buddhist and liked to use good sandalwood in the room, which was a habit of his. Prince Zhou had already gone back, leaving Chu Luchen alone. Because he had just had a good rest, it was inconvenient for him to leave, so they played chess together. As for the hospitality, Prince Cheng specially asked Ruian Great Elder Princess to make the decision. The so-called decision was different from the previous meaning. He personally asked her to make the decision. Ruian Great Elder Princess came to entertain the guests for him before, just to entertain these misses. If he really wanted to choose, he would treat himself. But now he entrusted all of it to Ruian Great Elder Princess, which meant that she could make the decision for him and help him choose some people. He was not interested in it at all. Ruian Great Elder Princess was not willing to do it at first. She deliberately brought these misses to the garden to let Prince Cheng choose himself. Unexpectedly, after what happened with Qin Yuru, Prince Cheng actually entrusted all of it to her and let her make the decision, which made it difficult for Ruian Great Elder Princess. She did come here to have a look, but she just wanted to have a look. How could she help Prince Cheng make the decision? Now Prince Cheng threw the matter to her impatiently. Thinking of what had happened just now, Ruian Great Elder Princess also felt very tired. This first miss of Ningyuan army general was really a weirdo. She was engaged, but how could she have the face to do this kind of thing? She was even more shameless than those unmarried misses who deliberately looked for opportunities to get close to princes and princes. Originally, Prince Cheng had no intention of marrying a wife. It was not easy for him to agree to marry a wife. Now, he was hit by this shameless first Miss Qin and seemed to be unwilling to pick a wife. Ruian Great Elder Princess was also very helpless. Seeing that Prince Cheng insisted on doing this, he could only lead the large group of people back to the inner courtyard parlor. Prince Zhou felt that there was nothing to watch, so he left with his men. When Chu Luchen came over, he saw Prince Cheng quietly playing chess with him, so he sat opposite him and started to play chess. The two of them went back and forth, but it was very quiet. The chess game was in a stalemate, and it was difficult to determine the victor. Prince Cheng held a chess piece in his hand, and his eyes fell on the chessboard for a long time without saying anything. Seeing that he did not make a move for a long time, Chu Luchen picked up the teacup beside him and took a sip. Then he put it down slowly and asked casually, "Uncle, why don't you choose a miss from an aristocratic family?" "Great Elder Princess will help me with this matter," Prince Cheng said without raising his head. "Great Elder Princess must not have picked one that you like." "Uncle, you won't entrust this matter to Great Elder Princess, will you?" Chu Luchen raised his eyes slightly and said with a faint smile. "It doesn't matter. It's just that there are a few more women in the mansion. Prince Cheng was still looking for a suitable place to place his chess piece, so he answered casually. But this is Prince Cheng's wife. Uncle, can you really not care about it? Chu Luchen said meaningfully. His words made Prince Cheng's hand stop. He raised his head and put the chess piece aside. He also picked up the tea at hand and took a sip. Then he frowned and said with a bitter smile, I don't want to get married at all. If I marry someone, I will just be a burden to others. I'm afraid that I want to belong to Buddhism for the rest of my life. Since you don't want to, why did you promise my uncle and imperial grandmother? Chu Luchen asked with a puzzled look, with some elegant concern on his face. Prince Cheng's eyes fell on Chu Liuchen's face. Seeing that he actually asked this question sincerely, the smile on his face became more and more bitter. Since this matter is decided by my brother and mother, it's useless for me to oppose it. Actually, what's so good about women? Something happened today. An engaged woman actually barged in front of me and deliberately dropped an earring. If all the women in this world are like this, then how can this prince get married? Prince Cheng sighed, as if he could not avoid it at all costs. What happened to Qin Yuru gave him inspiration. If it was inconvenient to refuse before and he had to compromise, now there was a new turning point because of Qin Yuru. The assassination on the night of New Year's Eve made him appear in the eyes of the emperor. At this time, he had to listen to the emperor and choose a wife. After that, he discussed with his aides about what kind of woman was the most suitable to marry into his mansion. But now he felt that with this incident, his dislike for women could be justified. It was reasonable that he did not want to get married. Therefore, he didn't want to care about anything and directly put all the blame on Ru and great elder princess. Originally, he showed that he did not like women and only wanted to join Buddhism. At this time, after being provoked by Qin Yuru, this idea was even more reasonable. It was a good reason to shirk the responsibility. Of course, it was not convenient for other women to enter his mansion. Maybe he would have a woman in the future, but not now. At this time, he did not want to attract others' attention. As the assassination became more and more serious, many things were out of his control. He had to come to this step, but at the moment he could still change it. The daughter of Ningyuan army general was really annoying, but at this time, it was a surprise for him. Uncle, it was just an accident. There are not many women in this world who are as shameless as her. Chu Luchen comforted Prince Cheng with a smile. Before she showed it, who would have thought that she was shameless? All the women in this world are good at hiding. If she did not find it before, she might expose it later. If she found it after entering Prince Cheng's mansion, she would not be the only one who would be embarrassed. Prince Cheng shook his head and refused decisively. Uncle, are you going to tell my uncle like this? Chu Luchen smiled and said calmly. He had rested for a while. At this time, he looked good, but his complexion was a little lighter than that of ordinary people, which made him look a little colder than ordinary people. He was more like an immortal who did not enter the mortal world. This was indeed what Prince Cheng had always thought before. For this sick nephew, he had never despised him, but he also did not pay attention to him. However, Shichi said that Chu Luchen had a woman with him at that time, which made him feel like an immortal who had been dragged into the mortal world and become a libertine. There was a huge deviation here, and Prince Cheng still could not figure out what was going on. Later, Chu Luchen had an accident, which pulled him into the whirlpool. Whether it was intentional or unintentional, Prince Cheng still could not figure it out. After looking at Chu Luchen opposite him, Prince Cheng said slowly, I really have to tell my brother about this. If my brother agrees that I will not marry a princess, it will be the best. If my brother says that I must marry a princess, then I will marry her. In the end, he said this very helplessly, as if he had been really shocked and had no idea, but under the pressure of the emperor, he said, It is difficult for one who has seen the sea to be water. If I miss it, I will miss it. She said the last sentence in a very low voice, almost talking to herself, but Chu Luchen heard it clearly. With a trace of deepness in his eyes, he saw Prince Cheng put down a chess piece, and then he also put down a chess piece in his hand. He said, Imperial grandmother also wants me to get married. But I am in such a situation now. How can I get married? I am as embarrassed as uncle. Prince Cheng agreed with this in his heart. Chu Luchen didn't know how long he could live, so it was better not to marry a princess, so as not to hurt the princess. But of course, it was not convenient for him to say this in front of Chu Luchen. If he really said something wrong, the Empress Dowager would definitely punish him. At the moment, he smiled and comforted him. Your illness is not incurable. Didn't my mother also invite many imperial physicians to treat you? You can take your time to recuperate. Take my time to recuperate? But of course, Imperial grandmother wants me to marry a princess as soon as possible. Chu Luchen put down another chess piece and said without raising his head. His eyes were still on the chess game and he seemed to be extremely focused. Prince Cheng's heart moved, and he put down the chess piece in his hand, but his attention fell on Chu Luchen. The look on his face became more and more peaceful. Can you ask my mother to postpone it for a few years? You are still young. Imperial grandmother is very anxious, and I am also annoyed, but I also know that Imperial grandmother does it for me, but I am now. Chu Luchen shook his sleeves. Although he didn't continue, Prince Cheng understood the meaning of his words. It seemed that Chu Liuchen's illness was not faking, and it seemed that he really didn't want to get married. Maybe he also felt annoyed and didn't have the energy to take care of a princess. He glanced at the wheelchair in which Chu Luchen was sitting calmly. He remembered that Chu Luchen didn't sit in a wheelchair much before, but now it seemed that he did it more often. But looking at Xiao Xuanzi's skillful movements, he knew that he had been doing it all the time. Chu Liuchen's body was getting worse and worse? In fact, there is a way. Prince Cheng thought of something and suddenly suggested to Chu Luchen. Uncle, do you have any good ideas? Chu Luchen raised his eyelids lazily, as if he didn't believe that Prince Cheng had any good ideas. I do have a plan, but it depends on whether you want to use it or not. Prince Cheng smiled with a gentle and decent look, as if he really wanted to help Chu Luchen. Uncle, tell me about it. Seeing that Prince Cheng was so confident, Chu Luchen seemed to be a little energetic, smiled slightly and asked. It seemed that he really didn't like to get married. Prince Cheng's somewhat suspicious eyes showed a trace of thoughtfulness. Then who was the girl that Shichi met before? Was her identity not high enough, or was it really just an occasional show? Or was Chu Luchen like this in private? In the past, it was just the surface. If it was really like this, Chu Luchen was not as harmless as he looked? I helped you with an idea, so you have to help me with an idea. Prince Cheng was thinking a lot, but he didn't show it on his face and said with a smile. Okay, I will try my best. Chu Luchen looked at Prince Cheng with his deep eyes, seemed to put down the chess piece in his hand casually, and said with a smile. Chapter 412. Why don't you temporarily choose a younger miss? She is too young, so you can't get married right away. In this way, you can give an explanation to my mother. Seeing that there was no way to turn the situation around, Prince Cheng helplessly sat down again and said while picking up his chess pieces. It was Master Jie Yen who thought of this idea for him before. At this time, with a flash of inspiration, he directly gave this idea to Chu Luchen. This is also a good idea. But it is not easy to find such a person. I don't like those picky women in the capital city. Chu Luchen also picked up his chess piece. Hearing Prince Cheng's words, he knocked a chess piece in his hand on the table and said with a malicious look in his eyes. Prince Cheng certainly knew Chu Liuchen's reaction. When Empress Dowager intended to choose a wife for him, he heard that those misses from aristocratic families who were present at that time all looked at other princes with affection. At this time, he even hated all the misses from aristocratic families in the capital city. If she is not a miss from an aristocratic family in the capital city, I'm afraid my mother will not agree. Prince Cheng reminded him with a smile. Empress Dowager doted on Chu Luchen so much. If she chose a wife for him, she must be of high status, and she must be a miss from a big aristocratic family. Anyway, I don't like those snobbish women in the capital city. Chu Luchen continued to pick up the chess pieces without lifting his hand and said lazily. Once again he did not hesitate to repeat it, which showed that he really didn't like them. If she is not a miss from an aristocratic family, it is impossible. If you really don't like the previous ones, you can actually choose a miss from an aristocratic family who has just arrived in the capital city. After all, they have never appeared in the capital city before and have never been snobbish. Prince Ching thought for a while and helped him to give an idea. Chu Luchen was hurt by those misses from aristocratic families in the capital city after the previous concubine selection. Then he could choose a miss who had just arrived in the capital city. At least at that time when Chu Luchen was choosing concubines, this person must not be present, so that Chu Luchen could untie the knot in his heart. If he could make friends with Chu Luchen, Prince Chung would be very happy. Which one is suitable? Chu Luchen was very pleased with her words. He raised his pale face and asked with a smile. Prince Chung was stunned by this question. In fact, he just said it casually. Hearing Chu Liuchen's detailed question, he didn't think of anyone else for a moment. Suddenly, he thought of what he said before and immediately said with a smile, I heard that the second daughter of Ningyuan Army General is young but beautiful. Maybe you can consider it. In fact, when they were in the yard just now, Prince Ching had seen Qin Wanru. However, at that time, his attention was focused on Qin Yuru and he did not notice Qin Wanru's appearance. The so-called outstanding appearance was just a casual remark without specific verification. This was also what Master Jie Yen had said before. King Cheng borrowed it temporarily. Ningyuan Army General? Chu Luchen repeated and frowned, as if he couldn't remember who it was. Ningyuan Army General Qin Huaiyong. Prince Cheng reminded him with a smile. Chu Luchen put down the chess piece in his hand, leaned back on his wide wheelchair, and said with some disgust, I do know her. I've known her since I was in Jiangzhou. She's just a little young girl. Being young has its advantages. Empress Dowager won't let you get married in a hurry. When she grows up and gets married, it will take many years. Moreover, she is young and has just arrived in the capital city. She must not be so snobbish. Prince Ching said. He was not surprised that Chu Luchen knew Qin Wanru. At that time, Qin Wanru was involved in the incident at the gate of the palace. Many people who knew the real situation guessed that Chu Luchen and second Miss Qin knew each other. Now, hearing Chu Luchen admit it openly, they were more and more sure that Qin Wanru was really involved in the incident at that time. It seemed that Chu Luchen didn't really care about her. That's good. Well, that's settled. Chu Luchen nodded casually, as if he was going to eat something later. This casual attitude made Prince Ching stunned. He suddenly felt that this matter was too casual. He coughed in a low voice and tentatively asked, Do you really think second Miss Qin is good? Since it's Uncle Wang's suggestion and I also know her, I've lived in their mansion when I was in Jiangzhou. She's quite well behaved. It doesn't matter if she's too small. At least, she can delay her marriage for a few more years. My imperial grandmother can also refuse it. She's indeed a good candidate. Chu Liuchen's words sounded very serious, but his eyes, which were full of smiles, did not look serious at all. After that, he raised the chess piece in his hand to Prince Ching and said, Uncle, I'll play first. After he put down the chess piece, he paid more attention to the problem than before. He even moved another position when Prince Ching had not put down the chess piece. This kind of naughty look stunned Prince Ching. He shook his head helplessly and put down the chess piece with a smile. After all, he didn't care about it. But since he had mentioned it, he should not have anything to do with second Miss Qin in the future. Uncle, thank you for helping me think of a way. In fact, if you really don't want to marry a princess, you can also talk about what happened today. Chu Luchen also put down a chess piece. This time, he was very well behaved and no longer moved the chess piece. He shook his robe elegantly and said meaningfully, What do you mean? Prince Ching smiled. Today, your consort selection was disturbed by a woman, which made you realize that there is such a hateful woman in this world. Originally, you didn't want to marry, and the reason why you agreed was also the intention of Empress Dowager and my uncle. But now that you have suffered a blow, you have a reason to say that you don't want to marry for the time being. Originally, Prince Ching didn't like women very much, so he didn't want to marry a princess. This time, he naturally had no other choice and couldn't withdraw even if he wanted to. If he made an excuse because of Qin Yuru, he could at least postpone it for a period of time. In fact, this was the original idea that Prince Ching had made up. Hearing Chu Liuchen's words, he immediately showed a look of sudden enlightenment and nodded repeatedly. Good, good, it is indeed a good idea. Speaking of this, Prince Ching hesitated again. Uncle, do you still have any concerns? Do you really like this first Miss Qin and want to compete with the heir of Duke Yong's mansion for the beauty? Chu Luchen raised his beautiful eyebrows and asked curiously. How could it be possible? I am afraid of getting you into trouble. This first Miss Qin is the elder sister of second Miss Qin just now, and also the daughter of Ningyuan Army General. Prince Ching shook his head again and again, showing a look of politeness but not politeness. He stayed away from this first Miss Qin like a ghost. It doesn't matter. It's just a matter of this prince choosing a young lady from an aristocratic family that I like and doesn't dislike. As long as Uncle Wang doesn't involve her when you talk about this matter, it'll be fine. Chu Luchen waved his hand indifferently and said. Hearing what he said, Prince Ching understood and laughed. It seemed that Chu Luchen really didn't take this second Miss Qin seriously. Since it was he who helped Chu Luchen come up with this idea, in order to make friends with Chu Luchen he couldn't ruin this matter. He had to find a chance to help Chu Luchen. If he could make Chu Luchen stand on his side, it would be of great benefit to him. Prince Ching didn't believe that his elder brother didn't have any helpers at that time. But his nephew was too weak, otherwise he would definitely pay more attention to him. If he could hold the helpers left by his elder brother in his hand, it would be much easier for him to do what he wanted. Prince Ching had an ulterior motive. Of course, he tried to please his young nephew. Chu Luchen was just a weak teenager who had not experienced hardships and was not dangerous. Prince Ching just needed to coax him. Although he knew that his nephew was a little temperamental, so what? What could he do with his poor health? Thinking of this, he became more and more patient. He must not go against Chu Luchen's mind. He would never involve the second Miss Qin, whom he had just proposed, in order to show his sincerity to Chu Luchen. As for the woman Shichi saw before, it was probably Chu Luchen's reverse psychology. The Empress Dowager and the Emperor didn't want him to marry a noble miss from an aristocratic family, so he just found a woman with a low status who couldn't be seen. Of course, his purpose was to go against the Empress Dowager and the Emperor. The reason for this speculation was entirely because of Chu Luchen's words and behavior just now. That was how a teenager who was in the second year of high school was. Prince Cheng felt that he also had such a period of time, but he was more sensible and it didn't take long for him to pass this period. And now Chu Luchen was at the right age. Now that they had figured out the cause and effect, of course, the more they talked, the more they got along. Prince Cheng was also very tolerant of Chu Luchen, like a doting elder. Even if Chu Luchen was a rascal and moved a few pawns, he was generous and didn't point them out. They got along well with each other. They got along well with each other and helped each other come up with ideas. It seemed that their relationship suddenly became closer. However, something happened in Duke Yong's mansion. When Qin Yuru returned to the mansion, she actually collided with another carriage. The carriage was half overturned, and Qin Yuru was injured and fainted on the ground. Qin Yuru didn't go out with Qin Huaiyong this time. When she went out of Duke Yong's mansion, Qin Huaiyong was still talking in the study of Duke Yong's mansion. When the news came, Qin Huaiyong was anxious to go out, but he was reported that Qin Yuru had been taken away by the carriage of Duke Xing's mansion. It was also the carriage of Duke Xing's mansion that had an accident, and the madam of the third branch of Duke Xing's mansion was sitting in the carriage. It was said that this madam was also injured, but seeing Qin Yuru was injured, she hurriedly took Qin Yuru to Duke Xing's mansion. Qin Huaiyong hurriedly went to Duke Xing's mansion. When he arrived at Duke Xing's mansion, he said that Duke Xing happened to be absent, and Madam of Duke Xing was taking care of the injured, so she had no time to see him. She only asked a servant to pass a message to Qin Huaiyong, saying that first Miss Qin had woken up at this time, but could not be moved for a while, and asked him to go back first. Qin Huaiyong had no choice but to go back to his general's mansion, and directly went to Madame Dowager's Xining Pavilion to discuss countermeasures with her. Chapter 413. Is Big Sister badly hurt? Qin Wanru blinked her eyes, put down the medical book in her hand and asked. I heard that she is also badly hurt, so it is not convenient to move her for a while. It is said that she should not have been hit so hard, but because of the carriage of third madam, she hit it hard. Yu Jie reported. Although this was what she heard from Qin Huaiyong's servant, Yu Jie still didn't believe it. Others didn't know what kind of person First Miss was, but how could she not know? With First Miss's extremely selfish character, how could she hurt herself for others? Hearing that Yujie emphasized the word heard, Qin Wanru couldn't help laughing. She raised her eyebrows and joked, "Heard? Yes, that's what I heard, but I don't think it is credible." Seeing that her miss was still in the mood to tease her, Yujie knew that her miss must have guessed something. Her tense face relaxed, and a faint smile appeared on her face. As long as her miss understood it, it was good. She was afraid that her miss didn't think of this kind of thing and was suddenly confused. "It is really good to have such a hearsay," Qin Wanru said meaningfully. First Miss is afraid that what happened in Prince Cheng's mansion will be spread out, so she made such a thing? After all, Yujie was not stupid, and she knew Qin Yuru's nature well. At this time, after thinking for a while, she immediately opened her eyes wide and said incredulously, "This was not an ordinary thing. If something really happened, it would be fatal." She didn't believe that First Miss would be so desperate. Even if something really happened, it would not be Qin Yuru. Qin Wanru stood up, walked to the window, and looked at the wall outside the window. It seemed that the third Madam of Duke Xing's mansion did not get along well with this Madam of Duke Xing. In the last life, what happened in Duke Xing's mansion was very far away from her. If Qin Yuru did not mention it in front of her proudly when she humiliated her, it seemed to be someone or something in another world. No one could think that this was her real family. Of course, this was only a family of blood. "Second Miss, what should we do now?" Qin Yu hesitated and asked. She had always been cautious, and she felt that there should be a follow-up. "Go and prepare some clothes. Someone should be coming to invite me later." Qin Wanru thought for a while and said, "Qin Yuru and Madam of Duke Xing played a good trick, and it happened to be at such a critical time. Although others would say that what happened to Qin Yuru in Prince Cheng's mansion was cheap, she had such a big accident, and it was because of others. Even if someone criticized her, the rumors would be reduced to a minimum. For the sake of the third Madam of Duke Xing's mansion, she hurt herself and couldn't even move now. For this reason, no one should blame her at this time." Ladies from aristocratic families were very particular about etiquette. Even if they were gossiping, they had to have a standard. Now Qin Yuru was still lying in bed unconscious. If they spoke ill of her at this time, it would make others doubt the character of this lady from aristocratic families. Qin Yuru grasped this critical moment very accurately. It was an excellent move. It could be regarded as a tacking way to save you. With such a good reputation, she could make up for her previous bad reputation. Although it might not be able to make up for all the bad reputation, there would certainly be people who would not blame her so much for what she did in Prince Cheng's mansion. They would even help her find reasons to explain what had happened in Prince Cheng's mansion. But sometimes, man proposes, God disposes. Qin Yuru had calculated the reaction of the ladies from aristocratic families and the benefits of this matter to her. She even grasped the timing very accurately. But what she didn't calculate was the hearts of the people in the imperial court. How could it be so easy to calculate Prince Cheng? Men and women had different ways of dealing with things. They wouldn't gossip, but it was much more effective to directly take action than to gossip. Prince Cheng hadn't married for so many years, so he must have his own special ideas. He was forced to choose a concubine because he had no choice. If there was such a reason, he could choose a concubine above board. If there was such a reason, how could he not choose a concubine? "Miss, do you mean that the general will ask you to take care of First Miss?" Hearing Qin Wanru's words, the two servant girls looked at each other and suddenly understood. Qin Yu stepped forward anxiously and said hurriedly, "Duke Xing's mansion was a dangerous place. It was not a good thing for Miss to go there at this time." "It doesn't matter. It's a good time. Prepare all the clothes." Qin Wanru smiled mysteriously. She turned around, walked to the dressing table and sat down. "Qin Yu, help me dress." "Miss, do you really want to go there? Madam of Duke Xing and First Miss have bad intentions towards you. Didn't you say that you wouldn't go there these days?" Yujie followed her in confusion. Seeing Qin Yu put down Qin Wanru's black hair, she couldn't bear it and asked in confusion. "Times have changed. Now is different from the past. This matter is big enough." Qin Wanru looked up at herself in the mirror. Under the black hair, her face looked more childish. Her skin was crystal clear and tender with a faint blush. At first glance, one could know that she looked very good. The corners of her red lips were slightly raised, which made her look very charming. In fact, this color was a little too bright, especially the corners of her lips. She bit the corners of her lips in disgust. She saw that the corners of her lips turned white at the moment when she opened them, but then they slowly returned to the previous bright red. In fact, she didn't like her overly bright color. She hadn't been sleeping well for the past few days. Every time she woke up from a nightmare, she would feel as if someone was criticizing her lips for being too alluring. So many people were criticizing her, and then she would be slapped hard in the face. Miss. Qin Yu's voice suddenly came to her ears. Qin Wanru suddenly woke up. Looking at herself in the mirror, her face was slightly pale. She actually thought of this dream again, the dream that had disturbed her sleep these days. I didn't want to go before because if I didn't go at that time, they would be more anxious and they would be more anxious to find a reason. Since they were looking for a reason, they must find a reasonable reason. Now Qin Yuru can't go out of the mansion casually. It must be reasonable and also can be approved by father. This reason is not so easy to find. Qin Wanru calmed down and collected her thoughts. Her long eyelashes fluttered, covering the deepness at the bottom of her eyes. She didn't say some things clearly. She was just drawing up a fixed result. The specific result still depended on Qin Yuru and Madame of Duke Xing's performance. And this time, the matter of Prince Cheng's mansion also forced Qin Yuru to take action. If the matter of Prince Cheng's mansion was really publicized, she might not be able to go out in the future. Although Qin Huaiyong was partial to her, it was impossible for him to let her go out and make a fool of herself. The simplest and most direct way was to lock her up until she got married. After she got married to Duke Yong's mansion, it was not Qin Huaiyong's concern whether Qin Yuru would appear in front of others. As for whether Di Yan would marry Qin Yuru, Qin Wanru had no doubt. In the current situation, Di Yan had to marry Qin Yuru no matter what. After so many things had happened, Di Yan and Qin Yuru had long been entangled together. And she was also happy to see this. When the marriage that they had planned with all their efforts was not as happy and beautiful as they had imagined, what would happen to the two resentful couples at that time was really exciting. Qin Yuru was anxious. Madame of Duke Xing was desperate. Some things were not necessarily laid out in advance, such as the third madam who went out of the mansion this time. She needed a gap of Duke Xing's mansion. The third madam was very good. Qin Wanru's guess was right. When she had just finished dressing up, Qin Huaiyong sent someone to call her over. After asking her a few questions about what had happened in Prince Cheng's mansion, he simply said that it might be a misunderstanding. The people of Duke Yong's mansion also said that it might be a misunderstanding. They also said that they would ask Qin Yuru to explain it clearly. But now these were not important. It was not appropriate for Qin Yuru to stay in Duke Xing's mansion alone. But if they carried her back, they were afraid that she would be seriously injured and it would be inconvenient to carry her out. In the whole Qin's mansion, only Qin Wanru could go to Duke Xing's mansion to take care of Qin Yuru. So they asked Qin Wanru to go to Duke Xing's mansion to stay for a few days and accompany Qin Yuru. When Qin Yuru's injury was a little better, she could come back with Qin Yuru. Yes, father. Qin Wanru nodded and answered very respectfully. Looking at his little daughter like this, Qin Huaiyong hesitated for a moment, but still said softly, "Your big sister has been misled by Madame D in the past, but this time she still keeps the kindness in her heart. I hope you two can be closer in the future. Your big sister now has no biological mother to take care of her." "Father, don't worry. I know." Qin Wanru raised her watery eyes and promised softly. At this time, her father was still so partial. He thought that the reason why Qin Yuru did so many bad things before was because of Madame D's instigation. Now he even used Madame D's matter to imply to Qin Wanru that Madame D would never be released again. In fact, he should not say this to her, should he? Was he trying to reassure her? Qin Wanru secretly raised the corner of her mouth. She was now more and more disappointed with her father. Qin Yuru was Qin Yuru's biological daughter, so it was understandable for Qin Huaiyong to be biased. However, she did not believe that Qin Huaiyong was such a person when she saw Qin Yuru's behavior. Qin Huaiyong was so biased that he seemed to have lost his usual shrewdness. Since he could see, hear, and understand, but he still behaved like this, what else couldn't she understand? She would leave Qin's mansion after all. Now she only worried about Madame Dowager and Shui Rulin. Fortunately, Madame D couldn't do anything now because of her current condition. After that, she would destroy all the wishful thinking of Qin Yuru, and then Qin Yuru wouldn't be able to make waves anymore. Father, I'll go back to tidy up some necessary clothes first. Qin Wanru said and left. Qin Huaiyong nodded and waved his hand. Qin Wanru bowed again and slowly left Qin Huaiyong's study with Yujie. Behind her, Qin Huaiyong looked at Qin Wanru's back silently, and the meaning in his eyes was unclear. After a long time, he sighed deeply, turned back to the desk, and took out something from the interlayer under the desk. After looking at it, he hesitantly held it in his hand. Chapter 414. Qin Wanru didn't expect to meet Nanny Huang, who came in a hurry on the way. 2nd Mississippi, seeing Qin Wanru, Nanny Huang didn't avoid her. Instead, she turned around from the side path and called Qin Wanru. Nanny Huang. Qin Wanru bowed sideways. Nanny Huang was the invited etiquette instructor, so her status in the mansion was naturally different from that of ordinary people. 2nd Miss, did something happen to 1st Miss? Nanny Huang asked anxiously. The news about Qin Yuru had been spread to Qin's mansion, but not many people knew the details. Did something happen to 1st Mrs. Carriage? Is she badly hurt? How could it happen all of a sudden? Nanny Huang asked anxiously. She originally wanted to go to the outer study to find Qin Huaiyong, but when she met Qin Wanru here, she stopped and asked Qin Wanru. She should be badly hurt. It is said that she can't get up at this time, so she is staying in Duke Xing's mansion. It is not suitable for her to move. Qin Wanru looked at Nanny Huang calmly and said, "She is in Duke Xing's mansion now?" Nanny Huang looked surprised. Qin Wanru nodded and turned around, looking like she was in a hurry to leave. 2nd Miss, are you going to Duke Xing's mansion to see 1st Miss? Nanny Huang asked hurriedly. Big sister is alone in Duke Xing's mansion, and it is not convenient for mother and grandmother. It is more suitable for me to watch over her, Qin Wanru said slowly. Indeed, that was the reason why she had prepared in advance. 2nd Miss, can you take me to see her? I am worried about 1st Mississippi, Nanny Huang suggested. Nanny, do you also want to go? Qin Wanru widened her bright watery eyes in surprise and looked Nanny Huang up and down. Nanny Huang was Qin Yuru's etiquette instructor. Naturally, it was inconvenient for her to control Qin Yuru like a supervisor nanny, and she would not really treat Qin Yuru as her master. If an etiquette instructor was just an etiquette instructor, she and Qin Yuru would have an employer-employee relationship, so there was really no need to worry so much. 1st Miss has been good to me before. Now she is hurt like this, I have to go to see her. Madame's current situation makes it inconvenient for her to go to see 1st Miss, Nanny Huang said very sincerely. In this way, he and Qin Yuru really got along well. Yujie was stunned and looked at Nanny Huang as if she had seen a ghost. Fortunately, Nanny Huang had good self-restraint. Even under Yujie's stunned gaze, her expression did not change at all, as if she really had a good relationship with Qin Yuru. Since Nanny also wants to go, then just follow me. I'll go back to pack some clothes first. Nanny, wait for me at the carriage. Qin Wanru slightly narrowed her eyes, which were deep and serene. All right, then I'll go and wait first. Nanny Huang said straightforwardly. After that, she turned around with the little servant girl behind her and went directly to the yard where carriages were parked in the mansion. Miss, what is she going to do? Seeing Nanny Huang walking away, Yujie asked in confusion. Naturally, it's to come up with a plan. Qin Wanru turned around and continued to walk inside slowly. They were the ones who were anxious, not her. She didn't have to rush there. She just needed to pack things slowly. If there was no accident, this time she would go to Duke Xing's mansion to make a big scene. Of course, she had to keep up with the follow-up. Nanny Huang is going to help 1st Miss to come up with a plan. Then why do we still take her? Yujie followed behind Qin Wanru and said in confusion, "Since she follows first Miss wholeheartedly, she will be against you. Miss, you shouldn't take her with you. It's good to take her with us. Otherwise, Qin Yuru will have no helper around her. When she wants to do something, she will have no helper." Qin Wanru smiled slightly and said meaningfully, Qin Yuru was not a quiet person. She would always do something. Qin Wanru didn't need her to be quiet. The more restless Qin Yuru was, the better. She would always pick out all kinds of things that Madame of Duxing didn't expect. Qin Wanru couldn't let Madame of Duxing control all the situations in her hands. Qin Yuru was very good. She was good at stirring up trouble. With Nanny Huang, she would have a helper. It didn't mean that Nanny Huang was not smart enough. Nanny Huang knew little about the affairs of Qin's mansion. It was not appropriate for her to come up with some ideas. Just like what happened in Prince Cheng's mansion this time, Qin Wanru was 100% sure that it was not Nanny Huang who came up with the idea that Qin Yuru had hooked up with Prince Cheng. It was Qin Yuru who wanted to cling to the rich and powerful, so she made such a scene. At this time, not only Madame of Duxing didn't know, but even Nanny Huang didn't know that Qin Yuru had made such a big mistake. Next, it was up to them to help Qin Yuru cover up this mistake. Madame of Duxing thought that everything would be fine after she made Qin Yuru into Duxing's mansion. But she didn't expect that Qin Yuru's problem also fell on Duxing's mansion. Because Qin Wanru had to tidy up and pack some spare things, she was a little slow. This time, she brought the two servant girls Chu Lu and Yu Jie to Duxing's mansion, and also brought some necessary clothes to change. When they arrived at the parking place, Nanny Huang was so anxious that she paced in circles several times. Seeing Qin Wanru coming, she breathed a sigh of relief. "Nanny Huang, sorry to keep you waiting. Let's get in the carriage together." Qin Wanru smiled slightly and invited her. "Second miss, you are too polite." Nanny Huang was not Qin Yuru after all. At this time, she had calmed down and said with a gentle look. Qin Wanru got in the carriage first, followed by Nanny Huang. The two servant girls got in the carriage last. The little servant girl who had followed Nanny Huang before did not come. The carriage was not big, but it was spacious for 4 people. After everyone sat down, the coachman drove the carriage to Duxing's mansion. Along the way, it was very quiet in the carriage. Qin Wanru slightly closed her eyes to rest. Under her long eyelashes, no one could see whether her eyes were closed or open. Nanny Huang lowered her head and frowned tightly. When she got in the carriage, she actually wanted to talk to Qin Wanru. However, as soon as Qin Wanru got in the carriage, she leaned against the carriage wall and closed her eyes to rest, so it was not convenient to disturb her. Qin Wanru did not speak, so it was not convenient for Nanny Huang to talk to the two servant girls. The way to collide with the carriage of Duxing's mansion was indeed her idea. When 2 carriages collided, it also needed to be calculated. Originally, she wanted Qin Yuru to spread the news today, and then they would discuss it. Who would expect that they directly collided today? Could it be that he really bumped into it by accident? Nanny Huang had always had a doubt in her heart. She originally wanted to ask Qin Wanru about it, but now she could only figure it out by herself. The more she thought about it, the more she felt that there was something wrong. They had agreed to wait for the next opportunity to take action. How could it be so fast? She looked up at Qin Wanru. She could not see it from her face, but she inexplicably felt anxious in her heart. She always felt that this matter would not be as calm as it seemed. All the way to Duxing's mansion, she felt uneasy. When the carriage stopped, Nanny Huang jumped out of the carriage first, then the 2 servant girls, and finally Qin Wanru jumped out with Yu Jie's hand. "Second Miss Qin, please." Nanny Sheng had been waiting outside the carriage. Seeing Qin Wanru come down, she bowed to Qin Wanru and led her forward with a smile. After walking for quite a while, they finally arrived at the entrance of a courtyard. Qin Wanru frowned as she looked at the road she came from. This courtyard was very close to Chuehua Gate. Soon after entering Chuehua Gate, they arrived at this courtyard. First, Miss Qin arranged for a guest house. In order to make it convenient to invite a doctor, our madam arranged for First Miss Qin to stay here. It will be more convenient for a doctor to go in and out. Seeing that Qin Wanru looked back at the old maid at the Chuehua Gate, Nanny Xing immediately understood her meaning and explained with a smile. Therefore, this place should be very close to the outer court. Nanny Xing, how is our first Mrs. Injury? Nanny Huang didn't pay attention to these things and couldn't help asking anxiously at this time. You are. Nanny Xing looked Nanny Huang up and down and felt that the old maid in front of her was not like the supervisor of the Qin's mansion. This is Nanny Huang, big sister's etiquette instructor. Qin Wanru introduced with a smile. Etiquette instructor? Why did she come here at this time? Nanny Xing frowned secretly. She didn't think that Qin Yuru's injury had anything to do with an etiquette instructor, but she naturally wouldn't say anything excessive in front of Nanny Huang. She immediately said with a flattering smile, Nanny Huang, don't worry. First Miss is fine. Nothing big happened, so it's just a small matter? Qin Wanru raised her watery eyes in surprise, and a trace of coldness flashed at the bottom of her eyes. How is First Miss? Nanny Huang really cared about Qin Yuru. When she heard Nanny Xing's tone, her face darkened. She hurt her hand, but it's not very serious. It's just inconvenient for her to move. Nanny Xing told the truth. It was really an accident. She just bumped into Nanny Xing a little. The coachman of Duke Xing's mansion had long been bribed by Madame. Originally, Madame planned to go out by herself, but it happened that third Madame was going out and wanted to borrow Madame's carriage. So Madame lent her carriage to third Madame. Whether it was Madame or third Madame, they were just a trick. However, they didn't expect that the carriage, which was supposed to be just a slight bump, would really startle the horse. Although the coachman finally restrained the horse on the shaft, the carriage really hit the horse. Third Madame was seriously injured, and First Miss Qin seemed to be seriously injured. Fortunately, the rest had been arranged well. No matter how serious it was, they would directly take Qin Wanru and say something serious. They also took the opportunity to say that First Miss Qin saved third Madame. Her hand is broken? Nanny Huang said in a trembling voice. She just planned to let Qin Yuru hit the carriage a little and then say that she was injured. She didn't expect that she really hurt her hand. It's not broken. She just needs to take good care of it. She twisted her tendon, Nanny Xing said vaguely. Let's go to see Big Sister first. Was it self-defeating? It was really an unexpected result. This third Madame was really wronged. If Qin Yuru had planned it well, she would not be completely unprepared. Qin Yuru's carriage seemed to be mysterious. She would find an opportunity to let someone have a look. Qin Wanru already had an idea in her mind. She looked at Nanny Xing and said lightly, "Okay. Second Miss, please go and have a look yourself." Nanny Xing immediately said with a flattering smile. While talking, she had entered the yard. Only as soon as they stepped into the yard, they heard a sharp scream, which scared everyone and made them stop. Chapter 4:15. Was this the consequence of twisting her tendons? Qin Wanru looked at Qin Yuru in front of her in astonishment. Her face was still the same. Except that it was a little twisted, her body seemed to be fine. She had just waved her hand and knocked a servant girl to the ground. Her legs and feet were also fine. She stood there steadily and seemed to be nothing serious on her body. Indeed, she didn't suffer much injury. The only eyesore was her tilted head. Yes, her head was tilted to one side, stiff, and her entire person looked extremely strange, as if her head had been forcefully tilted to one side. That originally beautiful face did not look the slightest bit beautiful at this moment. Not only was it twisted, but it also looked sinister. Qin Wanru, what are you doing here? Who asked you to come here? Qin Yuru screamed in pain because the servant girl accidentally touched her neck, and then she knocked the servant girl to the ground. She did not expect that Qin Wanru would come in at this time. For a moment, she was full of hatred and anger. She screamed at Qin Wanru loudly. Qin Wanru. Although she was prepared for the car crash, she did not expect that there would be an accident and she really twisted her neck. Although the doctor said that it was not a big deal and she would be fine after a period of rest, she was caught by Qin Wanru when she was in a mess. Nanny Huang frowned and wanted to say something, but she still closed her mouth after looking at Nanny Xing. However, her face was a little ugly. Now there were so many people and it was not convenient to ask Qin Yuru some questions. She could only stand aside and see the situation first. First miss, second miss is here to see you. Nanny Sheng's face darkened and she said coldly to Qin Yuru. She didn't say much, but the warning in her words made Qin Yuru's face turn pale and she immediately came to her senses. However, she couldn't put on a show of sisterhood to Qin Wanru at once. She snorted coldly, turned back to sit in the chair, tilted her head and squinted at Qin Wanru, and her voice became low. Did father ask you to see me? How did big sister hit the carriage of Duke Xing's mansion? Qin Wanru smiled slightly and sat in the chair on the other side with a calm look. She didn't show too much affection to Qin Yuru and looked like she was asking a question. What do you mean by that? It was the carriage of Duke Xing's mansion that hit me. If I hadn't asked the coachman to stabilize the horse, the third madam of Duke Xing's mansion would have been in big trouble. She had always been unwilling to show weakness in front of Qin Wanru. Hearing Qin Wanru's words, she immediately retorted. Big sister, do you mean that the carriage of the third madam of Duke Xing's mansion hit it on its own initiative? Qin Wanru frowned and looked like she wanted to figure out the truth of the matter. Qin Yuru reached out to touch her twisted neck and said angrily, "Of course it was someone else who bumped into me. I've become like this because of her." She was very angry. She had thought clearly about the accident that would happen if she collided with the carriage of Duke Xing's mansion. Therefore, she brought a few quilts in the carriage. Of course, she was afraid that the collision would be too heavy. If she was really hurt, the loss would outweigh the gain. Unexpectedly, she had protected her hands and feet, but failed to protect her head. She accidentally twisted it, and now her neck had not been twisted. Although the doctor said that it was not a big deal and that it would recover in a few days, she could not meet others in this state. Moreover, Qin Wanru had seen it. This was the last thing she wanted. It was the third madam of Duke Xing's mansion who hit your carriage? Qin Wanru seemed to not understand and asked again. Is it possible that it is fake? Of course, it was she who hit me. Qin Yuru thought that Qin Wanru did not believe it, so she said angrily. Nanny Xing, what's wrong with the carriage of the third madam of your mansion? Why did she hit someone on the street for no reason? Qin Wanru slightly raised the corner of her mouth and slid from Qin Yuru's face to Nanny Xing's face. Her watery eyes were cold. It was an accident. Who knew that such a thing would happen? In fact, the carriage of our mansion was fine before. I don't know why it collided with the carriage of the first Miss Qin. Fortunately, both of them are fine now. But it is not suitable for the first Miss Qin to go out in this state, so she can stay in our mansion to rest for a while and see if there are other injuries. Nanny Sheng explained with a smile. Accident. Qin Wanru seemed to be a little suspicious. Nanny Sheng's heart skipped a beat and she felt inexplicably uneasy. But she still said with a smile, of course it is an accident. No one can explain why such a thing happened. Our third madam is seriously injured and can't get up at this time. Compared with Qin Yuru who had been prepared for it, the third madam of Duke Xing's mansion was completely unaware of it. She was much more seriously injured than Qin Yuru and was still lying in bed at this time. Qin Wanru stood up and said, I will go to see the third madam. Since she came here on behalf of the people of Qin's mansion, she naturally had to see the third madam of Duke Xing's mansion. Before she came here, she also brought a gift. Thank you for your kindness, second Miss Qin, but our third madam is not in the mood to meet guests at this time. Nanny Sheng said with an embarrassed look. Is the third madam so seriously injured? Qin Wanru asked in surprise. Nanny Sheng nodded and looked a little serious. Our third madam is indeed seriously injured, and it is really inconvenient for her to meet guests at this time. In this case, please give the gift to the third madam to show our mansion's apology, Nanny Sheng, Qin Wanru said softly. Since Nanny Sheng said so, she naturally could not be an unwelcome guest and forced to see the third madam of Duke Xing's mansion. She could be sure that the third madam was really seriously injured. Qin Yuru was actually unscathed, except for the fact that she had accidentally twisted her neck. Her so-called injury was just a way of saying it. A trace of serenity flashed through her watery eyes, and a trace of sarcasm silently slid through the corners of her mouth. One reason was that the third madam was seriously injured, And the other reason was that she was not allowed to see the third madam because she was afraid that she would ask something. However, since she did not ask, she could also contact the third madam. The third madam of Duke Xing's mansion naturally did not have the power of Madam of Duke Xing, but she was not useless. Thank you, second Miss Qin. I will go to the first miss for a while. It is inconvenient for the first miss to go out now, so second miss, please choose a room to live in and go back when the first miss feels better. Nanny Xing nodded repeatedly and said with a smile. Qin Wanru smiled slightly and gestured to the servant girl behind her. The servant girl came forward to give the gift in her hand, and Nanny Xing also asked someone to receive it. Qin Wanru chose the room on the right of Qin Yuru to live in. Qin Yuru lived in the main room of this courtyard. The room on the right of Qin Wanru was also facing the direction of the inner courtyard, and the room on the other side was facing the direction of the outer courtyard. This courtyard happened to be near Chuehua Gate, with one side facing the outer courtyard and the other side facing the inner courtyard. After Wanru chose a room, Nanny Xing gave a few instructions to the servant girl in the courtyard, and then went back to report with the gift sent by Qin Wanru. Qin Wanru stood in the courtyard and squinted at the big pine tree in the courtyard. Although this courtyard was large, it looked a little solemn on the whole. There was a small pavilion under the big tree, with stone tables and stone benches in it, which was a very elegant place. In addition, the courtyard was clean, and there were no flowers or plants. There were pavilions on the wall of the courtyard, some in the inner courtyard, and some in the outer courtyard. Duke Xing's mansion had built many pavilions of different shapes like this. Looking from a distance, it made people feel that the magnificence of Duke Xing's mansion was not comparable to that of ordinary families. Because it was the Qin sisters who lived in it now, each of them had a personal servant girl with them. Duke Xing's mansion only provided an old maid to guard the door and 2 inferior servant girls to serve in the courtyard, and they were responsible for all the cleaning outside. After all, they were the misses of other mansions, and they lived here as guests, so this practice was very normal. Second miss, the first miss invites you in. Mei Shui hurried out of the room and bowed to Qin Wanru respectfully. What's the matter? Qin Wanru ignored her and walked into the pavilion leisurely. Yu Jie hurriedly picked up a cushion on the side and put it on one side of the fence for her. Qin Wanru sat down and leaned against the fence. The first miss is not feeling well, and she wants you to invite another doctor to have a look. Mei Shui had to follow and answered. You don't believe the doctor invited by Duke Xing's mansion? Qin Wanru raised her eyes slightly. Her eyes were clear but no emotion could be seen. It's not that I don't believe it, but… First miss is afraid of leaving sequelae. Mei Shui said uneasily. Although the doctor promised that there was nothing wrong as a woman who was willing to twist her neck. This situation could not be tolerated for a day, let alone there were still a few days left. Her first miss was so temperamental, so Mei Shui really did not dare to waste time, so she just proposed to Qin Yuru that they could invite a few more doctors to have a look. Previously, they were all from Duke Xing's mansion, so it was embarrassing to say more. But now the second miss came, they could ask the second miss to help them to invite more doctors. On the one hand, it could speed up the treatment of the neck, and on the other hand, it could let outsiders know that Qin Yuru was seriously injured and invited one doctor after another. Will there be sequelae? Qin Wanru asked unhurriedly. Mei Shui's forehead began to sweat. I don't know. Since you don't know, let's leave it like this for the time being. Although Big Sister looks a little ugly now, Child D is not here now. He will not see Big Sister in such an ugly look, so it's okay. Qin Wanru raised her delicate little face and said in a soft voice, but her words were extremely sarcastic. Second miss. Mei Shui still wanted to beg, but was interrupted by Yu Jie rudely. Mei Shui, you go back first. First miss looks like this now. No matter how many doctors are invited to have a look, it will be useless. Instead, more people will see it as a joke. Her words were also extremely sarcastic, almost not giving any face to Qin Yuru. The first Mississippi Mei Shui was angry and indignant, but she could do nothing. She bit her lip, looked at Qin Wanru who looked leisurely, gnashed her teeth, and turned to leave. Qin Wanru, what do you mean? In fact, the room was not far away. Qin Yuru, who had been standing by the window and looking out of the window, also heard the words of Qin Wanru and Yu Jie at this time. She was so angry that her face turned livid. She immediately couldn't bear it, opened the door, and walked out, and said angrily. Nanny Huang wanted to stop her, but it was too late. "Big sister, you look like this now, why are you still making trouble? You have made trouble in Prince Cheng's mansion before. Do you want to make trouble in Duke Xing's mansion now?" Qin Wanru stood up helplessly, looked at Qin Yuru who rushed out to denounce her. Her voice was not high, but it was enough to make Qin Yuru burst with anger, especially when she mentioned the matter of Prince Cheng's mansion. She raised her hand and was about to slap Qin Wanru's tender little face. Yu Jie reacted quickly, took Qin Wanru a step back, and happened to avoid Qin Yuru's slap. Chapter 416. The First Miss of Ningyuan Army General's Mansion? This is really disgraceful, the man said coldly and moved his eyes away from the window. His pavilion was a little far away, but he could still see Qin Yuru rushing out in an aggressive manner. The two sisters of Qin's mansion did not get along well with each other, but he did not expect it to be so bad. Moreover, the first Miss Qin looked really hateful while the second Miss Qin had her back to him, so he could not see her specific appearance, but he could see that she was the weaker one. The first Miss Qin just said a few words to a servant girl, and then she rushed out to hit her. It could be seen how shrewish and fierce she was. This woman looked really unpleasant. "Qin Wanru, are you here to accompany me or to annoy me in Duke Xing's mansion?" Qin Yuru became angrier when she failed to hit Qin Wanru. She did not expect that someone would see them in the pavilion. She only felt that there were no outsiders here, so she did not need to suppress her temper. Fortunately, she also knew that this was Duke Xing's mansion, so she did not chase after Qin Wanru after she failed to hit her. She just stared at Qin Wanru fiercely. "Big sister, you don't think that the matter of Prince Cheng's mansion is over, do you?" Qin Wanru raised her watery eyes, looked at Qin Yuru calmly and said. She looked too calm, and there was no change in her expression, but this made Qin Yuru panic. How could she not be afraid of the matter of Prince Cheng's mansion? That was why she could not wait to send a letter to Madame of Duke Xing. "Does it have anything to do with you? Qin Wanru, don't worry about it." Qin Yuru was annoyed when this matter was mentioned. She snorted angrily, turned around and walked into the room. Hearing Qin Wanru's words, she immediately felt that she should tell this matter to Madame of Duke Xing first, and was not in the mood to trouble Qin Wanru anymore. Nanny Huang happened to come, and she had to discuss it with Nanny Huang. "Let's go out for a walk." Seeing Qin Yuru rushing back to the room, Qin Wanru knew that she was going to discuss with Nanny Huang. She also stood up and walked outside. Sure enough, Nanny Huang was helping Qin Yuru with ideas. When Qin Yuru met Nanny Huang for the first time, she felt that this etiquette instructor was also very arrogant. At that time, when she looked at Qin Yuru and Qin Yuru, she seemed to weigh the pros and cons for a while. It could be seen that although she was entrusted by Duke Yong's mansion, she did not mean to help Qin Yuru wholeheartedly. It had only been a short time, but he was already helping Qin Yuru wholeheartedly. Qin Yuru would not believe that Duke Yong's mansion had nothing to do with this. As an etiquette instructor, Nanny Huang must have a lot of secret connections. "I need to be more careful." Right now, he had something more important to do. "Yes, miss." Yu Jie nodded and followed her. They went out of the courtyard one after another. Not far from the courtyard was the Chuehua Gate. There were two supervisor old maids chatting at the Chuehua Gate. Seeing Qin Wanru coming out of the courtyard, the two old maids did not take it seriously. They squinted at her and continued to chat. Qin Wanru turned and walked inside casually. After a few steps, she suddenly stopped and turned to walk to the two old maids. The two old maids were chatting enthusiastically. When one of them saw Qin Wanru coming over, she reached out and pulled the sleeves of the other old maid, hinting to her. The other old maid also turned around reluctantly. "May I ask which courtyard is the third madam of your mansion?" Qin Wanru came over and asked with a smile. "Our third madam lives in the westernmost courtyard, which is far from here." The old maid impatiently pointed to the distance. "How is the injury of your third madam?" Qin Wanru asked again as if she did not see the deep displeasure on the old maid's face. Our third madam is naturally seriously injured. She can't get up at this time. The old maid looked Qin Wanru up and down and said indifferently. Although the third madam had no power in the mansion, she was their master after all. It was obvious that the third madam was seriously injured, but she treated the first miss of the Qin's mansion as a treasure. The two old maids guarding the gate were very indignant for their third madam. She said that she saved the third madam, but it was she who bumped into the third madam and seriously injured her. Is the third madam so seriously injured? Qin Wanru looked surprised. Of course, our third madam is seriously injured. It doesn't look like. One of the old maids glanced at Qin Yuru's courtyard and was about to continue when the other old maid pulled her sleeves hard. The old maid closed her mouth, but she looked extremely angry. Although she did not speak, she looked at Qin Wanru with some unkindness. Second Miss Qin, our third madam is seriously injured. Even if you go there now, I am afraid you can't see third madam. The other old maid smiled and went forward to support Qin Wanru. Can I see your third miss? Qin Wanru asked softly. She was asking Xiao Tehuan, the eldest daughter of the third branch. Our third miss is not free at this time. She is serving our third madam. The old maid made an excuse. It was obvious that she was unwilling to take Qin Wanru there. Can you help to find a doctor? Qin Wanru frowned and changed the topic helplessly. Isn't the first miss fine? Why does she need to find a doctor? The old maid who was quick to speak said discontentedly as she looked at the courtyard next to her. The two old maids guarded the Chuahua gate, which was close to the courtyard where Qin Yuru lived temporarily. Others might not know the extent of Qin Yuru's injury, but the two old maids knew it clearly. The doctor clearly said that the first Miss Qin was fine. She just twisted her neck and was a little inconvenient. Big sister said that the injury was very serious and wanted to find another doctor. Qin Wanru's attitude became more and more kind. Her manner was delicate and decent. Although she looked young, her temperament was extraordinary. Compared with Qin Wanru, who caused the third madam of their mansion to be injured, Qin Yuru was much better. Second Miss Qin, don't mind me talking too much. First Miss Qin is really fine. She just twisted her neck. To put it bluntly, even when she is sleeping, she will sometimes twist her neck. It's really not a big deal. The old maid with a good attitude explained to Qin Wanru, who looked worried. Can I trouble you two to find a doctor for our young miss? Our first miss has a bad temper. Yujia stepped forward and took out 2 purses from her sleeve with a smile. She put them in the hands of the 2 old maids and said in a low voice. Pinching the purses in their hands, the 2 old maids felt that there was a lot of money in them. The 2 old maids looked better. Since second Miss Qin must find a doctor, I can also do it for her. But I have to say this first. I am afraid that even if you find another doctor, he will say the same. It doesn't matter. I just have to trouble you 2 nannies. But can you find another doctor? If all the doctors say the same, big sister will believe it. Qin Wanru smiled and explained kindly. In other words, Qin Yuru was suspicious by nature. She still didn't believe a doctor after seeing it. The 2 old maids looked at each other and had a good impression of Qin Wanru. Since they had received money from her, they naturally had to do something. Anyway, it was the same to find a doctor or 2 doctors. The 2 old maids discussed and left one to guard the door, while the other went out to find a doctor. Before, Madame had repeatedly told them not to treat the first miss of Qin's mansion poorly. Although they felt indignant for their third madam, they did not dare to really offend the first Miss Qin. They heard that their old madam liked the first Miss Qin very much. Seeing an old maid leave in a hurry, Qin Wanru turned around and walked inside casually. But this time, she was stopped by a beautiful servant girl before she walked for a long time. Greetings, second Miss Qin. The servant girl stepped forward and bowed to Qin Wanru, and happened to block Qin Wanru's way. Qin Wanru stood still. I was sent by old madam. Our old madam wants to see second Miss Qin. The servant girl said with a smile. But Qin Wanru thought for a moment, lowered her eyes and nodded. Old madam of Duke Xing's mansion met Qin Wanru in her own yard. After Qin Wanru came in and bowed, Old Madam looked Chin Wanru up and down with a cold face. Old Madam, this is the second miss of Chin's mansion. Seeing Old Madam's unkind face, Nanny Yu hurriedly stepped forward to smooth things over and introduced her again with a smile. Chin Wanru stood aside with her head down. Under her long eyelashes, her eyes were cold. It could be seen that this old madam disliked her very much. At this time, she was imposing on her. "Thank you for saving me before, second Miss Chin," Old Madam said slowly after looking at Chin Wanru up and down. There was no smile on her face. She said the so-called life-saving grace in such a light tone. "It's just a piece of cake. Old Madam, you don't have to be so polite." Chin Wanru raised her eyes, restrained the emotions at the bottom of her eyes, and said lightly, "Since the one who was saved did not care about it, why should she bear the life-saving grace? I heard that second Miss Chin and first Miss have always been on bad terms. Only when sisters get along well can family peace and everything will be prosperous." Old Madam coughed in a low voice and looked at her a few more times before saying. Nanny Yu's face was a little pale. Old Madam's words were extremely unpleasant. She clearly meant to rebuke Chin Wanru. If Chin Wanru was just an ordinary miss from an aristocratic family, with the identity of Old Madam of Duke Xing's mansion, she could rebuke her. However, Chin Wanru was the life-saving grace of Old Madam of Duke Xing's mansion. Old Madam might not take it seriously. After all, she directly fainted at that time and did not see Chin Wanru at all. At this time, she pretended not to know much. However, Nanny Yu directly confronted Chin Wanru at that time. Old Madam's words made her feel extremely embarrassed. She felt ungrateful and despised Chin Wanru. "Thank you for your concern, Old Madam." Chin Wanru did not explain but just smiled slightly and said lightly. Chin Wanru did not like this Old Madam of Duke Xing's mansion, who was also her real grandmother. She did not believe that this Old Madam of Duke Xing's mansion really knew nothing and was so confused that she was led by the nose by Madam of Duke Xing. "I heard that second Miss Chin and first Miss Chin quarreled on the street before, because of the pair of blood jade bracelets I gave to first Miss Chin before. Since second Miss Chin likes it, here is a pair. Nanny Yu, go and get it." Although Old Madam was smiling, her smile was a little cold. She reached out and waved to Nanny Yu, and said casually. Chapter 417. Chin Wanru was so angry that she almost laughed. Old Madam of Duke Xing's mansion really thought that she was superior to others. She casually dismissed her as if she was a beggar. Moreover, she even pushed all the blame for the quarrel with Chin Yuru on the street to her. Her deliberate act of shielding Chin Yuru made her look like an old grandmother who was extremely partial to her own granddaughter. But did she really care about her granddaughter so much? She sneered in her heart but didn't show it on her face. She stepped forward and said respectfully to Old Madam, "Thank you for your kindness, Old Madam, but I don't like blood jade bracelets." "I'm afraid Old Madam has misunderstood. I don't like Big Sister's blood jade bracelets no matter how beautiful they are. Great Elder Princess gave me a pair of blood jade bracelets before, and I also gave them to Big Sister." Since Madam Dowager tried to suppress her, she had to mention her maternal grandmother. As expected, Old Madam's face immediately darkened when she heard this, and she became more and more displeased with Chin Wanru. She snorted and said, "Since Great Elder Princess gave you blood jade bracelets, I won't give you blood jade bracelets. This time your big sister was seriously injured because she saved someone. She is a good girl. Go back and ask your grandmother to come here. I have something to discuss with her." Old Madam looked at Chin Wanru proudly and said, as if she didn't want to talk to her, "Grandmother is not in good health. I'm afraid she can't come here." Chin Wanru said respectfully, "Then ask your mother to come here." Old Madam became impatient and frowned. She increasingly disliked Chin Wanru. "Mother is pregnant, and it's not convenient." Chin Wanru continued to refuse calmly. "Then ask your father to come here." Old Madam said impatiently, "Yes." Chin Wanru lowered her head and said obediently, "Go back and ask your father to come here first." Old Madam waved her hand and looked like she didn't want to talk to Chin Wanru anymore. Chin Wanru bowed to her very respectfully and then left. Seeing old madam treat her miss so rudely, Yujia was very angry. When she went outside and was about to say something, she saw Qin Wanru turn to look at her, so she immediately stopped talking. When she returned to the courtyard, the two doctors invited by the old maid who guarded the door had come and were checking Qin Yuru's pulse. Qin Wanru stood beside Qin Yuru calmly. After taking his pulse, another doctor came over. "Doctor, how is my neck?" Qin Yuru asked anxiously. She had finished feeling her pulse. Said the doctor, "Miss, your neck is fine. You just need to rest for a few more days and get someone to massage it appropriately." The doctor who had finished checking her pulse comforted her. "It's really nothing. Don't worry, eldest miss." The other doctor also finished checking her pulse and stood up. Qin Wanru stepped forward and asked, "Big sister had a car crash. Besides the injury on her neck, do you have any other internal injuries? Hidden injuries?" The two doctors looked at each other and shook their heads. "This young lady is very well. Apart from a sprained tendon in her neck, there is nothing else wrong with her," a doctor said with a smile. "The injury on his neck isn't a big one. He'll be fine after resting for a few days." Another doctor said with a smile. Both of them looked relaxed. Obviously, Qin Yuru's injury was not a big deal. But the other madam was seriously injured before. "Is my big sister really fine?" Qin Wanru frowned and raised doubts. This was what Qin Yuru wanted to ask. Hearing Qin Wanru's question, she immediately nodded. "Yes, the madam who had a car crash with me said that it was a very serious accident. Am I really fine?" The reason why Qin Yuru was worried that she was also seriously injured was that she saw the third madam of Duke Xing's mansion covered in blood being carried down. At that time, she was frightened and felt guilty. "First miss, you are really fine," the doctor comforted her. "Really fine?" Qin Yuru still didn't believe it. "Really fine. If you don't believe me, you can ask another doctor to have a look." Being repeatedly questioned by Qin Yuru about his medical skills, a doctor's face didn't look very good. He felt that this first miss was a little unreasonable. Why didn't she understand what he said? "First miss, it's great that the doctor said you are fine." Seeing that Qin Yuru still wanted to say something, Nanny Huang immediately stepped forward and stopped her with a smile. "Really fine?" Qin Yuru muttered to herself. She felt uncomfortable all over, as if she was aching all over. "Yujia, take the two doctors to the side to write a prescription." Qin Wanru smiled slightly and ordered Yujia. "Two doctors, please come with me. I still have the consultation fee from our Mississippi." Yujia understood and said with a smile. The two doctors were very satisfied with this. They immediately nodded and followed Yujia to go out. "You invited them?" After the two doctors left, Qin Yuru's face changed. When the two doctors came to visit, they only said that they were invited by the servants of Duke Xing's mansion. She thought it was Madame of Duke Xing who invited them for her. "Big sister, do you think it is Duke Xing's mansion who invited them?" Qin Wanru said lightly. She sat down on a chair beside and poured herself a cup of tea. "Qin Wanru, are you trying to fool me again?" Qin Yuru sneered. Originally, she was dubious about the words of the two doctors. At this time, she immediately felt that none of their words were credible. The people invited by Qin Wanru did not all listen to Qin Wanru. "Big sister, what do you want to do? This is Duke Xing's mansion." Qin Wanru said in a slightly cold voice. "I don't want the doctors you invited. I don't know where you found these quacks. Drive them away." Qin Yuru was furious and screamed. At this time, she only cared about being angry at Qin Wanru. She did not expect that her voice was several times louder. Not only did Qin Wanru hear it clearly, but also the two doctors outside heard it clearly. Hearing this, the two doctors were so angry that their faces changed. They were doctors with good reputations. They did not expect that they would be questioned like this. They were immediately unhappy. They turned to the main room and snorted coldly. Without writing a prescription, they carried the medicine box and turned to leave angrily. "Two doctors, please prescribe medicine for our first miss before you leave." Yujia chased after them and shouted at the gate of the courtyard to the two doctors who were about to go out of Chuehua Gate. Your first miss is not sick at all. Why should she take medicine? One doctor said angrily. But our first miss feels sick. Yujia said anxiously. Your first miss just has a stiff neck and sprained her neck. She doesn't need to take medicine. Although the other doctor was calmer, he was also annoyed by Qin Yuru's words at this time. After saying this, he turned to leave with the previous doctor. The two old maids guarding the gate gave a few hollow laughs and did not dare to stop them. The doctor they invited was a famous doctor in the capital city. No one dared to offend such a famous doctor. Next time, it would be your turn to ask for help when you are sick. You could offend anyone but a doctor. Miss, the doctor left without prescribing medicine. Seeing the two doctors left without looking back, Yujia came back helplessly and reported to Qin Wanru. Qin Wanru, don't meddle in this. I asked you to invite a doctor, but you didn't do it. Now you secretly invite a doctor. What are your intentions? Qin Yuru looked Qin Wanru up and down suspiciously. She really didn't believe that Qin Wanru would be so kind. She asked Mei Shui to ask Qin Wanru for a doctor just to sound her out. She didn't really want Qin Wanru to ask for a doctor. Qin Wanru was willing to invite a doctor, but she was not willing to let Qin Wanru invite a doctor. First miss, I will go after the two doctors and ask them to prescribe medicine for first miss before leaving. Nanny Huang realized that it was not good, so she interrupted Qin Yuru and suggested. Doctors were in contact with all kinds of people. Nanny Huang only regretted that she did not think of it before. At this time, after asking Qin Yuru, she wanted to go out to chase after the two doctors. She had to pay the two doctors to shut up. Nanny Huang, I've already paid the deposit. Qin Wanru looked up at Nanny Huang, who looked anxious, and said, What? You still have to pay them? I don't know where the doctors came from. How dare they cheat money? Nanny Huang, you don't have to go after them. Even if they prescribe medicine, I dare not take it. Qin Yuru immediately misunderstood Nanny Huang's meaning and said angrily. First miss, the two doctors are famous doctors in the capital city. They also know a lot of people. They will not cheat money. Nanny Huang said anxiously. Qin Wanru was still sitting here, so she could not say some words very directly. She only hoped that Qin Yuru could understand the meaning of this. That's hard to say. Who knows how much money they have secretly paid them to make them lie? Qin Yuru snorted coldly and said disdainfully. She squinted at Qin Wanru and said meaningfully. Qin Wanru did not seem to understand that Qin Yuru was talking about her. She leaned back and looked at Nanny Huang with a faint smile. Nanny Huang, you can go after them and ask if they have received a lot of money. Nanny Huang could not respond for a moment. If she went after them now, it meant that she also thought that the two doctors had received money from Qin Wanru and lied. This was what Qin Yuru said, but she could not say it. Second miss, you must be joking. I just want to ask about first miss's condition. Nanny Huang smiled very awkwardly, but had to stop. Big sister knows best about big sister's health. Nanny Huang, you seem to care about big sister very much recently? Qin Wanru looked at Nanny Huang with a faint smile and said, I have the responsibility to educate First Mississippi. Of course, I can't let First Miss do anything wrong. Nanny Huang knew that she could not catch up at this time, so she could only say seriously. It's good that Nanny Huang can think in this way. Then I will trouble Nanny Huang to educate big sister. I will go to have a rest first. Qin Wanru stood up and said casually. Her words made Nanny Huang's face change and she was shocked. Qin Wanru, what do you mean? Qin Yuru said sharply. Nothing, I just feel tired. There are so many things today, including Prince Cheng's mansion and Duke Xing's mansion. Don't you feel tired, big sister? Qin Wanru reached out and gently pressed her forehead a few times and said helplessly. Her words made Qin Yuru tremble with fear and her face changed greatly. She had asked Mei Shui to find Madame of Duke Xing, but Madame of Duke Xing had not come yet. Did something happen? Chapter 418. Mei Shui rushed in and saw Qin Wanru in the room. After being stunned for a moment, she hurriedly stopped and hesitated. What's the matter? Qin Yuru was angry. Seeing Mei Shui making a fuss, she said with a straight face. First miss, Madam of Duke Xing asks you to go over. Mei Shui also saw other people in the room at this time and whispered, "How can I go over like this?" Qin Yuru said angrily. She still twisted her neck. If she went over like this, many people would laugh at her, and Madam of Duke Xing knew it. First Miss, several misses of Duke Xing's mansion have returned. Mei Shui said uneasily. She still remembered Madam of Duke Xing's angry look just now, so she did not dare to answer like this. She carefully reminded Qin Yuru. Qin Wanru calmly picked up the tea at hand and took a sip. This meant that the consort selection banquet of Prince Cheng's mansion was over. Madam of Duke Xing knew what happened to Qin Yuru in Prince Cheng's mansion. Back. Qin Yuru did not understand at first. After thinking for a while, she immediately understood the meaning of Mei Shui's words. She asked Mei Shui to go over and explain to Madam of Duke Xing implicitly what happened in Prince Cheng's mansion. She wanted to report to Madam of Duke Xing first because she was afraid that Madam of Duke Xing would be angry if she knew what she had done in Prince Cheng's mansion. Madam of Duke Xing knew nothing about that. Let's go and have a look. At this time, Qin Yuru did not care that she twisted her neck and looked ugly. She immediately stood up and walked out, ignoring Qin Wanru who was still sitting in the room. Mei Shui led the way and Qin Yuru followed her out. Nanny Huang thought about it and was worried, so she wanted to catch up with them. Nanny Huang, please wait. Qin Wanru suddenly said. Nanny Huang stopped and had to stop. Nanny Huang, do you know what happened? Qin Wanru smiled slightly. What happened to the two doctors just now made her think that it was better to kill Nanny Huang. What happened? Nanny Huang suppressed her anxiety and had a bad feeling in her heart. Big sister tried to seduce Prince Ching in Prince Cheng's mansion before, but Prince Ching didn't like it. Many young madams present watched the drama. I wonder if Nanny Huang, as Big Sister's etiquette instructor, knows about it? Qin Wanru said slowly and raised her watery eyes which were as light as glass. Nanny Huang's face turned pale, and her lips trembled twice. She could hardly speak. She reached out to hold the pillar on the side to stabilize her body. She only felt a buzzing sound in her head. She had been teaching young ladies of aristocratic families for many years and had seen many strange things, but she had never seen such a shameless thing. How could an engaged woman dare to hook up with another man? Moreover, this man was Prince Ching, who had always been unwilling to marry. How shameless and despicable Qin Yuru must be to do such a thing. Nanny Huang, are you wholeheartedly helping Big Sister now? Nanny Huang, do you think it won't affect you if eldest sister's affair is exposed? Qin Wanru looked at Nanny Huang and said gently. Only her eyes were so clear that Nanny Huang didn't dare to look at them directly. Her expression and bearing were far beyond that of ordinary young ladies of aristocratic families. Second Miss, why do you say so? Nanny Huang's lips trembled, and she suppressed her emotions in her heart and said slowly. Nanny Huang, the reason why you are so dedicated to Big Sister is that Big Sister has said something to you? Qin Wanru stood up and looked around the room with her watery eyes. This is Duke Xing's mansion. I heard that the former heir of Duke Xing lost a daughter. However, he left the capital city for about 13 years, but Big Sister should be 15 years old. She said it very casually as if she just said it. After that, she didn't look at Nanny Huang's suddenly livid face and walked out. Qin Wanru slightly raised the corner of her mouth. She didn't know what Qin Yuru had said to Nanny Huang and to what extent, but she guessed that Qin Yuru had used both the carrot and the stick. The so-called carrot was naturally related to Qin Yuru's so-called family background, or promised some benefits, or said that Qin Yuru was the lineal miss of Duke Xing. When Qin Wanru didn't know what Qin Yuru had said specifically, she naturally mentioned it very vaguely. She guessed that Qin Yuru had lied. First Miss is only 13 years old, isn't she? As expected, Nanny Huang's trembling voice came from behind. Do you believe it, Nanny Huang? Qin Wanru slightly tilted her head and asked with a little coquettishness. Believe it? Nanny Huang didn't know. Although she educated Qin Yuru, she was not familiar with the people around Qin Yuru. Occasionally, she seemed to vaguely hear that Qin Yuru was 15 years old, but later Qin Yuru said that she was only 13 years old, which made her a little confused. What happened in Prince Cheng's mansion today will be spread out soon. Prince Cheng is the nephew of Ru and great elder princess. If big sister is really related to the former heir of Duke Xing, there is a gap in seniority between you and Prince Cheng. Qin Wanru pointed out. After finishing her words, she ignored Nanny Huang, who was dumbstruck behind her, and turned to walk out. Yu Jie followed her closely. What was the relationship between the granddaughter of R and great elder princess and the nephew of R and great elder princess? If Qin Yuru was really the daughter of the former heir of Duke Xing, it was impossible for her to seduce Prince Cheng. They were not in seniority, and they were so close. It was impossible for such a thing to happen. But on the other hand, since Qin Yuru had done this, it meant that Qin Yuru knew clearly in her heart that she had nothing to do with Prince Cheng, so there was such a thing. Nanny Huang moved stiffly to the chair on the side and sat down slowly. After thinking about the matter several times, she finally sorted out some ideas. The so-called origin that Qin Yuru had told her was fake. It was impossible for her to be the abandoned daughter of the former heir of Duke Xing. She was fake. What she did was to use this identity. If this kind of thing was exposed, she would immediately lose her reputation. Not only Qin Yuru, but also Nanny Huang. Although her family had received benefits from Duke Yong's mansion and promised her to make plans for Qin Yuru wholeheartedly, it did not mean that she had to sacrifice her entire family and even her life for it. She was willing to work for Qin Yuru before. On the one hand, it was because of the generous gift from Duke Yong's mansion and some prestige. On the other hand, it was because of the origin that Qin Yuru had told her before. If all this was fake, then it was useless for her to make plans. Thinking about this, Nanny Huang stood up, pulled her clothes, turned around, and walked out decisively. She couldn't stay and suffer with Qin Yuru. Even if she didn't want to be an etiquette instructor in the future, she could go far away. She absolutely didn't want to be a victim in this matter. She had taught Qin Yuru for a period of time. If something really happened, she was afraid that she would use her as a shield. "Miss, where are we going?" Yu Jie could not bear it anymore and asked. Along the way, Qin Wanru walked very leisurely, as if she just wanted to enjoy the scenery. She stopped from time to time to enjoy the scenery. Along the way, she met a lot of servants of Duke Xing's mansion, and all of them looked at Qin Wanru with unfriendly eyes, which made Yu Jie more and more uncomfortable. "Just walk around," Qin Wanru said indifferently, as if she did not see the servant girl coming from the opposite side. She looked arrogant. Seeing Qin Wanru coming to her face, she just avoided to the side and did not salute. It could be seen that all the servants of Duke Xing's mansion were very neglectful to her. This kind of neglect could be seen on their faces, and they probably could not bear it anymore. In fact, the servant girl in front of her was quite familiar. She had seen her more than once along the way. Since old madam did not like her, she would not care about the thin blood kinship. The first time she saw this servant girl was in old madam's yard. "Miss, do you want to take a rest for a while?" Yu Jie looked at the servant girl, who avoided to the side of the road, and carefully reminded Qin Wanru. "No, I have nothing to do anyway. The scenery in this mansion is good. It would be great if our mansion could have such scenery. This time, I will take the opportunity of big sister living here to enjoy the scenery." Qin Wanru raised her beautiful little face with a smile, looked sideways at the rockery on the side, and praised. The contempt and happiness in her words were not like that of a younger sister who moved in to take care of her elder sister who was injured. He sounded very happy, even gloating over the misfortune of others. The servant girl standing on the side raised the corner of her mouth sarcastically. This servant girl was really ignorant. As old madam said, she was ignorant and greedy. She robbed first Miss Qin's jade bracelet and broke it in the street. She was so narrow-minded that she even looked down on servant girls like them. After a while, she would go to report to old madam. This second Miss Qin not only did not take old madam's words seriously, but also strolled in the garden with the servant girl. "Miss, do you want to go over there and have a look? The yard over there looks very beautiful." Peeping at the expression of the servant girl of Duke Xing's mansion and then looking at her Mrs. Leisurely look, Yu Jie suddenly understood. She immediately agreed with Qin Wanru, reached out and pointed to a yard not far away in front of them and said. The yard looked magnificent at first glance. It was definitely not a place that ordinary people could afford to live. There were rockery at the entrance, a small bridge, and a gurgling stream. Okay, let's go and have a look. Qin Wanru also seemed to be interested. She lifted the corner of her skirt and was about to walk over. The servant girl of Duke Xing's mansion couldn't stand it anymore. She felt that she was about to explode with anger. Where did this peerless girl come from? How dare she go to First Mrs. Yard? She didn't know whether she had the face to do so. Miss, that's our First Mrs. Yard. Not everyone can enter it. The servant girl straightened up and said in an enigmatic tone. Our miss is not an ordinary person. She is invited by your madam of Duke Xing. Yujia seemed to not hear the contempt in the servant girl's words. She raised her face and said arrogantly. Our madam of Duke Xing doesn't invite just anyone. I wonder which mansion you are from. The servant girl looked her up and down and became more and more disdainful. She really thought that she didn't know how the person in front of her came in and even dared to scare her here. Our miss is from Ningyuan Army General's mansion. Yujia said proudly. Oh, it turns out that you are from the mansion of the miss who bumped into our third madam. The servant girl seemed to be suddenly enlightened. She looked Qin Wanru up and down, and then reached out to point and said, That is our First Mrs. Yard. No one can go there casually. Otherwise, she will be severely punished. Miss, please leave. Yujia was angry. Don't you know that you should follow the rules of other mansions when you go to other mansions? The servant girl interrupted Yujia's words rudely, sneered, and turned to leave. She was going to report to Madame Dowager. This second Miss Qin was untactful, unruly, and good for nothing. Madame Dowager sent her here to see if she worked for Madame Dowager sincerely. She sent someone to invite the general of Qin's mansion to discuss the matter of first Miss Qin. Now it seemed that this general was not a good person and deliberately delayed. Chapter 419. First Miss Qin, how could you do such a thing in Prince Cheng's mansion? Madame of Duke Xing was so angry that she banged the table hard and said harshly. Xiao Jie, the second miss of Duke Xing's mansion, was sitting beside her. At this time, she was enjoying a good show. It was she who brought back the previous rumor. She was the daughter of a concubine in Duke Xing's mansion, but she had never been favored. Although she carefully flattered Madame of Duke Xing, she was even inferior to Madame of Duke Xing's principal maid. She had always been bossed around. It was rare to see someone worse than her, so she naturally saw a good show. Madame of Duke Xing, this is really a misunderstanding. I don't know why this happened, but this is really a misunderstanding. I also entered the garden by mistake. Qin Yuru explained in a panic. Entered by mistake? First Miss Qin, do you really think everyone is a fool? Madame of Duke Xing was really angry. She was not old Madame of Duke Yong, who would naturally beautify Qin Yuru's behavior. Thinking that her plan was flawed because of Qin Yuru, she was so angry that she wanted to slap Qin Yuru twice. How could there be such a shameless woman? Did she know that she had been engaged? How could she have the face to seduce Prince Cheng? Moreover, she had succeeded in recognizing her ancestor. She was not only related to Prince Cheng by blood, but also in the wrong generation. Did she really not know what she was doing? Madam, this is really an accident. I just wanted to walk casually at that time. I didn't expect to meet Prince Cheng, and I don't know when I lost my earring. Qin Yuru knew that she should grit her teeth at this time, so she refused to admit it. Anyway, she insisted on saying so. Could others force her to admit it? Madam, don't you know what kind of person I am? How could I make such a mess at this time? Moreover, my parents know the marriage between my cousin and me. Qin Yuru wiped her tears. She had thought of a reason before, and it was just right to use it to defend herself. Jie, you leave first. Madame of Duke Xing stared at her for a while, and then waved her hand with a cold face and said, Yes, mother. Xiao Jie, stood up obediently and left the courtyard with her maid. However, she stopped at the gate of the courtyard and turned to the back of the courtyard with her maid. Although Qin Yuru and Madame of Duke Xing didn't say anything, it made her feel suspicious. There seemed to be a lot of things in it. It was said that first Miss Qin, who was liked by Madame Dowager, seemed to be familiar with Madame Dowager. Why was Madame Dowager so angry? The first Miss Qin and the Ningyuan army general's mansion behind her were shameful, which had nothing to do with their mansion. However, Madame seemed to have been ruined by the first Miss Qin. Could there be some kind of secret here? Where are you going, second miss? However, she couldn't figure out what was strange at the moment. Yes, cousin also comforted me and said that it would be fine after a period of time. It is not true after all. Qin Yuru nodded and said. Madame of Duke Xing fell silent. Qin Yuru's accident of running into the carriage was indeed very hasty. However, according to her explanation, it seemed to be reasonable. Before the thing in Prince Cheng's mansion was completely spread out, the accident of running into the carriage with her third sister-in-law had been spread out. Moreover, she was injured because of rescuing her third sister-in-law. With this incident as the foundation, the possibility of the thing in Prince Cheng's mansion being a misunderstanding was very high. After all, a kind-hearted girl was unlikely to do such a shameless thing. Thinking in this way, it seemed to be not in conflict with her own matter. Seeing that Madame of Duke Xing was silent, Qin Yuru said anxiously, Madam, if you don't believe me, you can send someone to ask my maternal grandmother about it and ask whether they really agree with me at that time. Her maternal grandmother had always loved her. Even if Madame of Duke Xing sent someone to ask, it didn't matter. Qin Yuru's words were extremely confident. As for Di Yan, when her identity here was confirmed, would he really do anything to her? How's your neck? Hearing what she said, Madame of Duke Xing's expression softened. My neck is fine. The doctor said it will be better soon. I just need to have a good rest. Seeing that Madame of Duke Xing had stopped questioning her, Qin Yuru immediately said cleverly. She didn't believe in the doctor before, with a bit of rudeness to make trouble. At this time, in front of Madame of Duke Xing, she naturally didn't dare to say so. Will it be better tomorrow? Madame of Duke Xing frowned and said. As long as the hidden danger of Qin Wanru's matter was not eliminated, she couldn't calm down. Since Qin Yuru had entered Duke Xing's mansion, this matter could not be delayed any longer. It may be better tomorrow. Qin Yuru didn't dare to guarantee. The doctor only said that it would be better after a good sleep tomorrow. After that, she needed to have a good rest for a period of time. However, he didn't say that it would be better tomorrow. Let's not delay it. Let's do it tomorrow. Tomorrow, invite a few elders to come over. There is no need to hold a big banquet. After you get better, hold a big banquet. Madame of Duke Xing said. Speed was of the essence in war. Since this matter had already happened, the best way was to make use of this matter to directly acknowledge Qin Yuru. Thank you, madam. Qin Yuru was overjoyed. She twisted her neck and bowed to Madame of Duke Xing. She also felt relieved. From now on, she was the Miss of Duke Xing's mansion and the biological granddaughter of and great elder princess. In the future, no one dared to treat her badly. Old Madame will recognize you as her adopted granddaughter. Madame of Duke Xing didn't ask her to get up, but said slowly. Qin Yuru raised her head suddenly, looked at Madame of Duke Xing in surprise, and said hurriedly, Didn't you say, the former heir of Duke Xing's? She didn't know how to say it for a moment, and the sweat on her forehead involuntarily broke out. Of course, biological granddaughter and adopted granddaughter were different. If she was just a adopted granddaughter, there was no difference between her and Qi Rongji's status. Although Qi Rongji had become the adopted daughter of Madame of Duke Xing, which made her very envious, she could obviously get more. Why did she want to be like Qi Rongji? However, the previous things were handled by Madame D. Qin Yuru didn't know whether Madame of Duke Xing really knew something or had any agreement with Madame D before, so she didn't know what to say for a moment. When great elder princess won't recognize you. Madame of Duke Xing sneered and said. But you and old Madame can recognize me. Qin Yuru said eagerly. At this time, she just felt that it was much better to be adopted then adopted, so she subconsciously fought for her rights. This will be very troublesome and lead to a series of problems. I will recognize you as my adopted granddaughter on the surface, but privately spread the rumor that you are your adopted granddaughter. If and Great Elder Princess asks, I can only say that you are not. Madam of Duke Xing said calmly. This was what she had discussed with old Madam. And Great Elder Princess would not intervene if she only recognized her adopted granddaughter. However, if she said that she was the daughter of the former heir of Duke Xing, and Great Elder Princess would definitely intervene. At that time, things would deviate from the direction she had planned. She would spread the news that Qin Yuru was the daughter of the former heir of Duke Xing. But if Ru and Great Elder Princess came to ask, she would definitely refuse to admit it. It was a mixture of truth and falsehood, which would make Ru and Great Elder Princess confused and feel that Qin Yuru was really her biological granddaughter. In that case, some things would be much easier to handle. Duke Xing's mansion's plan was never just Ningyuan army general's mansion. They were even more unwilling to be stepped on by an impostor. If they refused to admit that they were biological relatives, but behaved like they were, Duke Xing's mansion would be able to attack and defend at will. Chapter 420. Madam, isn't it too urgent? Qin Yuru didn't stay for a long time. After she left, Nanny Sheng asked anxiously. Yes, but if we don't take advantage of this opportunity, I'm afraid there won't be another chance in the future. Madam of Duke Xing gritted her teeth and said, if she had known that Qin Yuru got into this kind of trouble again, she would definitely think about it, but now it was too late. Should we tell Marquis about it? Nanny Sheng frowned and said, it's so urgent. We should at least tell Marquis about it, right? Don't tell him. It's useless to tell him, and it will make him say something. Now that things have come to this, and old Madam also thinks so, let's not wait. Madam of Duke Xing refused decisively. If they waited, there might be changes. She had planned for a period of time, and finally Madam D and Qin Yuru took the initiative to pretend to be Qin Yuru's parents. If she missed Qin Yuru, where could she find another one who took the initiative and set up such a good background? Although there was a difference between initiative and passivity, it was related to the problem of who would bear the responsibility after the incident. Madam of Duke Xing had always been cautious, so how could she put herself on the opposite side of this matter above board? You're going to recognize him tomorrow? Nanny Sheng hesitated and pointed in a direction, which was the direction of old Madam's courtyard. Tomorrow. Madam of Duke Xing nodded and said, find a few servant girls and old maids who are good at massaging later. Today, they will take turns to massage first Miss Qin. You must make her hair straighten tomorrow. Otherwise, she will look ugly. Not only was it ugly, but it would also make people feel that it was too urgent and seem to be covering up something. Madam of Duke Xing certainly wouldn't let people have such a guess. A niece who pretended to be Qin Yuru would benefit her more than just replacing a position. The rest depended on Qin Yuru's performance. With Qin Yuru and without Qin Yuru, things would be very different in the future. Her daughter secretly came back to the capital city and specially met Qin Yuru, just to confirm it again. Madam, I'm afraid it's a little difficult. Think about it, even if you have a stiff neck, you can't get better in a short time. What's more, first Miss Qin's current situation is much more serious than a stiff neck. Nanny Sheng felt it was very difficult, so she withdrew her hand and shook her head. Madame of Duke Xing thought for a moment, and her face was a little gloomy. Is there no other way? Can't I get a quick one with a stiff neck? Nanny Sheng frowned at first. After thinking for a while, her eyes suddenly lit up. She immediately said eagerly, Madam, there is a way, but it's a little harmful to the body. What do you mean? Madame of Duke Xing's face lit up. Didn't Madame Dowager suffer from a stiff neck before? Duke invited an old maid to massage Madame Dowager. I also wanted to learn a little at that time, so I made friends with the old maid in private. The old maid didn't hide anything from me and taught me a few tricks. When we were chatting, she said that there is a way to make a stiff neck recover quickly, or to make it look better, which is acupuncture. Nanny Sheng said. This thing was really mentioned by chance. Nanny Sheng just asked at that time, and the old maid also said casually. Stiff neck was not a big deal, but sometimes it was not very convenient. If she had to attend some necessary occasions, it would be a little embarrassing if she had a stiff neck at that time. However, this kind of acupuncture could not cure the root cause. It could only look normal, but in fact, the neck was still stiff. It would hurt if she moved it, but it was not crooked. Moreover, the degree of the stiff neck was even more serious. After all, it was already a straight process from a crooked stiff neck to a straight stiff neck. Straightening the stiff neck would definitely hurt the tendons of the neck. Chin Yuru had hurt the tendons. Straightening the stiff neck would be more serious than straightening the stiff neck. She might not be able to move her neck for a period of time. After Nanny Sheng finished talking about this in detail, Madame of Duke Xing immediately nodded and said, "Is the old maid still there? Let her do acupuncture for Chin Yuru." She didn't care about Chin Yuru's health. "Yes, I will secretly invite her to come here later, but even if the neck can't be seen, she may not look very good." Nanny Sheng was a little hesitant. This method was a little harmful. The injured would be more injured, and her face would definitely look bad. It doesn't matter. As long as Chin Yuru comes out tomorrow and finishes the business, she can rest for a long time. As for treating the symptoms but not the root cause, she originally had a car accident, so it is normal for her to look bad. Madame of Duke Xing sneered and said sarcastically, "She has made so many things and needs me to help her bring up the rear. She has to show some sincerity. Yes, I will arrange it now." Nanny Sheng felt that Madame of Duke Xing was reasonable, so she immediately responded. Nanny Sheng also looked down on this first Miss Chin, who wanted to play up to the rich and powerful. "Wait a minute. You go to inform Duke Yong's mansion later. Tell them that old madam will recognize Chin Yuru as her adopted granddaughter tomorrow and invite them to attend the ceremony." "Yes, I know. What about Chin's mansion?" "Old madam will invite and discuss the affairs of Chin's mansion. It has nothing to do with us." Madame of Duke Xing raised the corner of her mouth sarcastically. She would not rush to find trouble. Pulling strings and building bridges had nothing to do with her. Even if something really happened, it had nothing to do with her. Qin Wanru did not know that old Madame of Duke Xing's mansion invited Qin Huayong. What she knew was that she had successfully annoyed old Madame, and old Madame would probably hate her very much now. And this was originally her goal. Even if her real identity was indeed related to Duke Xing's mansion, she was not willing to live in Duke Xing's mansion now. Old Madame's hate was a crucial part. The more old Madame hated her, the more reasons she would have to leave Duke Xing's mansion. After her age became her weakness, she wanted to find a fair reason to leave Duke Xing's mansion. But now she was sitting in a pavilion with interest, looking at Qi Rongji in front of her with gentle eyes. Compared with her, Qi Rongji looked flustered and exasperated. It could be seen that Qi Rongji was very anxious and angry. Just now when she was walking casually, Qi Rongji came out from behind a rockery and stopped her. Now they were sitting in the pavilion behind the rockery. This place seemed to be secluded. On one side was a rockery, and on the other side was a wall. They could hear people passing by outside, but people outside could not see them. Qi Rongji found a good place. "What does Qin Yuru mean?" Qi Rongji was perturbed and asked in a low voice with a pale face. She did not want people passing by outside to hear their conversation. Since she got the news that Qin Yuru entered the mansion, she had been perturbed, angry, and hateful. She wants to become the lineal miss of Duke Xing's mansion. Qin Wanru smiled slightly. Her long eyelashes fluttered twice, which made her eyes look deep and clear, beautiful and enchanting. If it was in the past, Qi Rongji would be jealous and hateful when she saw Qin Wanru like this. But today her focus was not on Qin Wanru, so she naturally did not notice Qin Wanru's natural beauty. She was now wholeheartedly thinking about Qin Yuru. Thinking of Qin Yuru would endanger her position. Why does she become a lineal miss? Does she really think she is the daughter of the former heir of Duke Xing? Qi Rongji said restlessly. In the conversation between Qin Wanru and her before, this meaning had been faintly revealed. Why not? Anyway, you don't know, I don't know, and others don't know. Qin Wanru said softly with a smile. She looked leisurely as if this matter had nothing to do with her. Don't know? Qin Yuru really thinks she can do whatever she wants. Qi Rongji gritted her teeth. How could she let Qin Yuru do what she wanted? Moreover, she did not want Qin Yuru to share her favor. Of course, it was not only favor, but also all the attention of old Madam and Madam of Duke Xing's mansion. No, as long as she was here, Qin Yuru must not enter Duke Xing's mansion. Jiangzhou is too far and it is too late. Old Madam asked me to go back and ask my father to come. It should be to discuss the matter of recognizing Big Sister. I guess there may be news tomorrow. Qin Wanru lowered her head and pulled the corner of her clothes, with a faint smile on her lips. What, so soon? Qi Rongji could not sit still anymore. She suddenly stood up and walked around in the pavilion for a few times. She originally thought it would take some time, but after hearing Qin Wanru's words, she also thought it would happen tomorrow. No, she must stop it. But she had not convinced her big brother. Her big brother would not give her the evidence in his hands. What should she do? What should she do? Qi Rongji was so anxious that her forehead was immediately covered with sweat. First, Miss Qi, why are you in such a hurry? Sit down and have some tea. You and Big Sister will be sisters in the future. You and Big Sister must have done a lot of blind dates when you were in Jiangzhou. Qin Wanru pulled the corner of her clothes and stood up, looking very leisurely and ready to leave. This matter had nothing to do with her, so she naturally did not need to be anxious. Blind date with Qin Yuru and her sister? She doesn't deserve it. Qi Rongji sneered. She now hated Qin Yuru very much, only thinking that Qin Yuru came to rob her of her wealth. Why not? Big Sister has been preparing for this for a long time. Now no one can prove that she is not. Qin Wanru said meaningfully. Who said there isn't? There is. Qi Rongji said angrily. There is? But you can't get it. Qin Wanru smiled, and her expression became more and more elegant. She rolled her watery eyes and said with some interest, I don't know if First Miss Qi can defeat Big Sister next. In the past in Jiangzhou, First Miss Qi has always been at a disadvantage in the hands of Big Sister. When she was in Jiangzhou, Qin Yuru could be said to be a goddess. Not only was her status at the top in Jiangzhou, but even Qi Tianyu had to give in to her again and again. If Qi Rongji fought with her, Qi Tianyu always told Qi Rongji not to fight with Qin Yuru. That was why Qi Rongji vented her anger on Qin Wanru. Thinking of this, Qi Rongji could not bear it anymore, feeling the burning fire in her heart uncomfortable. I will definitely get it, she said with an angry face. Definitely get it? Are you going to steal it? Qin Wanru looked up in surprise, seemingly very surprised. Chapter 421. Qi Rongji left in a hurry, even more than Qin Wanru. Looking at Qi Rongji who couldn't wait, Qin Wanru smiled slightly and stood still, watching Qi Rongji's hurried figure. She didn't know what kind of evidence Qi Tianyu had, but he must have it. Qi Tianyu was very cautious, and Qi Baiyu had never had a chance to steal the original letter from him. He didn't trust Qi Baiyu, but he trusted his sister. If there was anyone else who could get the evidence from Qi Tianyu, it could only be Qi Rongji. Qi Rongji must have gone to find Qi Tianyu. That would be the best. It would be the best if she could get it, but if she couldn't, she had a countermeasure. She turned around and walked back slowly. When she came to the yard, she found Qin Yuru was already there. An old maid stood behind Qin Yuru, who was kneading her crooked and stiff neck. Hearing the footsteps, she opened her eyes and saw it was Qin Wanru. Then she closed her eyes without a sound, as if she didn't see Qin Wanru come in. Qin Wanru didn't care and looked at the old maid behind her. She was very skilled, but no matter how skilled she was, her crooked neck couldn't be cured in a short time. But her eyes fell on a small half-opened bag behind the old maid, and her eyes unconsciously became gloomy. Acupuncture? Following her eyes, Yuja's eyes also fell on a few long needles in the bag, and her face changed slightly. She also understood that the old maid not only kneaded her neck, but also used acupuncture. Both Qin Wanru and Yuja knew that acupuncture would not work at this time, and it would even make it more difficult for her to recover later. Madame of Duke Xing was anxious. Big sister, if there is nothing else, I will go to have a rest. Knowing that she was not needed here, Qin Wanru said with indifferent eyes, and her words were not intimate. Go! Qin Yuru didn't open her eyes and snorted. After tomorrow, she and Qin Wanru would be really different. She was not in the mood to pretend to be a sister with Qin Wanru. Qin Wanru left and had a rest in the wing room where she lived temporarily, while Yujia was sent to pick a few plum blossoms. On the way here, there were many plum trees in Duke Xing's mansion. It was reasonable to ask Yujia to go out with such an excuse. After all, Qin Wanru was the miss of the master, so it was very inconvenient for her to go in and out, and there were also many people watching her. Yujia was just a servant girl who picked a few suitable flowers, but it was very convenient for her. Qin Huayong should be invited by old madam at this time. Qin Wanru did not ask Yujia to know clearly what they were talking about, but asked Yujia to know a little about Qin Huayong's schedule. Take Yuru as your granddaughter? Qin Huayong put down the teacup in his hand, frowned slightly, and asked in confusion, why did old madam take a fancy to Yuru? He was invited by old madam just now. Your daughter and I hit it off at first sight, and I like a child like her very much. I heard that her mother is quite ill, so she can be raised in Duke Xing's mansion in the future. I will naturally love her as my own granddaughter. Old madam smiled, and her eyes were gentle, which was completely different from when she saw Qin Wanru before. Nanny Yu sighed helplessly on the side. When she heard that the second Miss Qin saved her, old madam still had a good impression of her. Of course, this kind of good impression could not be compared with the first Miss Qin. But later, news came one after another saying that the second Miss Qin seemed to be not simple. In addition, old madam just asked her to invite Ning Yu an army general, but she actually agreed on the surface but disobeyed on the surface, which annoyed old madam. Last time when she saw the second miss, she was obviously not like this. Why did she become so annoying now? At that time, the young woman who was calm, and able to handle heavy things with ease used to be her backbone. Why was she so ignorant now and did not take old madam seriously? Nanny Yu did not understand, but she did not dare to speak carelessly. She said a few good words for the second Miss Qin before, but old madam, who had never reprimanded her, was furious and even said that if she said such words again, the relationship of master and servant for many years would be over. So Nanny Yu did not dare to say anything more. Old madam, do you really like Yuru? Qin Huayong seemed to be moved by old madam's words just now, and asked after thinking for a while. Yes, I do like the first Mississippi, old madam smiled kindly. Hearing old madam's words and seeing that old madam seemed to really like Qin Huayong thought a little longer this time, but he still nodded. Then I will have to trouble old madam in the future. Don't mention it. Yuru will be my granddaughter in the future, and it is reasonable for me to care more about my granddaughter. Old madam also breathed a sigh of relief. She did not expect that her goal would be achieved so easily. Immediately, her smile became more and more kind, as if Qin Yuru was really her biological granddaughter. Yuru's neck was slightly injured, and she needs to recuperate for a period of time. Tomorrow, we will simply recognize her and ask several elders to be witnesses. After that, she will be allowed to recuperate in Duke Xing's mansion. The mansion will invite Imperial physicians to treat her, and the education will also specially invite suitable nannies to teach her. Old madam had already made arrangements in her mind. Seeing that Qin Huayong agreed, she immediately told him what would happen next. As for the fact that old madam thought that Qin Yuru was her biological granddaughter, old madam thought that there was no need to tell Qin Huayong. Madam of Duke Xing told her the pros and cons of formally recognizing Qin Yuru. The pros outweighed the cons, and it was better not to tell the truth. Anyway, she would raise her as her biological granddaughter in the future. Except for the title of her biological granddaughter, she could give her anything else. It was not a grievance. Old madam, is it too hasty? Qin Huayong asked. If it's faster, it will be more justifiable for her to live here, and it will also be good for her injury. Old madam guided him patiently. Her words repeatedly indicated that Qin Yuru could only get greater benefits if she had a relationship with Duke Xing's mansion. Qin Huaiyong was silent, and it was obvious that he was hesitant. Old Madam picked up the tea at hand and took a sip unhurriedly. She did not believe that Qin Huaiyong would give up such a good opportunity. She was the daughter of lineal descent of Ningyuan Army General's mansion and the granddaughter of Duke Xing's mansion. The meaning of this was more than a simple change of mansion. In this case, everything is at Old Madam's command. After a moment of silence, Qin Huaiyong understood, raised his eyes, and said decisively, "Okay, then it's settled. From now on, our two families will be considered as one family. If you have any difficulties, you can directly come to us." Old Madam was very satisfied with Qin Huaiyong's attitude. Her smile became more and more amiable, and there was some kindness in her words, which made people have a good impression. Qin Huaiyong understood what she meant. Not only Qin Yuru became the daughter of Duke Xing's mansion, but also he would get many benefits. "Thank you, Old Madam." Qin Huaiyong was overjoyed. He stood up and bowed to Old Madam respectfully. "Ningyuan Army General, you are too polite." Old Madam nodded with a smile. Since the matter had been settled, Qin Huaiyong could not stay here any longer. He stood up and said goodbye. He promised to come to watch the ceremony tomorrow. Coming out of Old Madam's courtyard, Qin Huaiyong followed an old maid to go out, but he met Madam of Duke Xing on the way. "Ningyuan Army General." Madam of Duke Xing seemed to be surprised to see Qin Huaiyong, but she reacted quickly. She immediately showed a gentle smile and stood at the intersection. "Madam of Duke Xing." Since he met Madam of Duke Xing, Qin Huaiyong naturally stopped. "Can I ask the general what second miss likes?" Madam of Duke Xing asked with a smile. "Wanru." Qin Huaiyong looked at Madam of Duke Xing in confusion. Just now Old Madam said that she likes Yuru. What does this have to do with Wanru? "It has nothing to do with second miss, but tomorrow I will prepare a gift for second miss, so I want to know some of second miss preferences. I wonder if Ningyuan Army General can tell me some of second miss preferences?" Madam of Duke Xing said gently. Hearing Madam of Duke Xing's words, Qin Huaiyong was embarrassed to refuse again. He immediately told her some of Qin Wanru's preferences that he knew. Madam of Duke Xing nodded repeatedly while listening. After they stood on the roadside and talked for a while, Qin Huaiyong left. "Have you remembered all of them?" Looking at Qin Huaiyong's figure leaving in a hurry, Madam of Duke Xing said slowly in a low voice. "Don't worry, madam. I have almost memorized all of them." Nanny Sheng stepped forward and said. She had been carefully remembering what Ningyuan Army General said just now. After going back, sort them out. Madam of Duke Xing nodded, turned around and went back. She had come to stop Qin Huaiyong on purpose. During the conversation just now, she got a lot of information. "Madam, I will write them down later, but I am afraid that they may not be used tomorrow." Nanny Sheng followed her and turned in a direction, lowered her voice and said carefully. She was the henchman of Madam of Duke Xing, so she certainly knew the meaning of Madam's behavior just now. In Nanny Sheng's opinion, in fact, there was no need to go through so much trouble. Madam was still too cautious. "Prepare them first. If there is any change, we can use them first. Even if Qin Wanru is cunning, she will not think of this kind of thing. Or also think so." Those two people were prepared by Ru early. Madam of Duke Xing said in a low voice. Although her daughter was young, she was born to be extraordinary and considerate. Since she asked her to be careful, she would listen to her and be prepared. Since Qin Wanru was really Shi Qinghua's daughter, she must not let her live. Even if those two people could not be used tomorrow, they would still be used in the future. Hearing that it was the first Miss's idea, Nanny Sheng did not dare to say anything more. Although the first Miss was young, she had always been smart. Since she said so, it naturally made sense. It was destined to be a difficult night to fall asleep. Qin Yuru moaned for half the night, and from time to time, Qin Yuru's scream could be heard. It should be the effect of acupuncture. Qin Wanru also slept uncomfortably because of her. It was unknown when Qin Yuru's voice stopped, and Qin Wanru also fell asleep like a dream. Tomorrow, she was waiting for tomorrow. Chapter 422. It was not late when Qin Wanru woke up the next day. The sky outside was still a little bright, but Qin Yuru's main room had been noisy. Many people came in and out, and the noise came out early. It was very noisy, so Qin Wanru had to get up early. Qin Wanru reached out to rub between her eyebrows and called in a low voice, "Yujia." But no one answered. She reached out to lift the gauze curtain and saw that there was no one in the room, which made her feel strange. When they were outside, Yujia was always afraid that something would happen to her, so she always stayed by her side. "Yujia," she called in a low voice. This time, no one answered. She lifted the curtain and got out of bed with her hair hanging down. When she was about to go to the window to see, the door was pushed open. Yujia came in with her toiletries and looked angry. Seeing that Qin Wanru had woken up, she hurriedly helped her to wash up. "Miss, I'm going to find hot water for you to wash up." First Mrs. Servant said that First Miss needs hot water. Today is a big event for First Miss, so they have to wait for First Miss first, Yujia said angrily. Qin Wanru sat in front of the dressing table and looked at Yujia calmly through the mirror. "They have already gotten up?" "They have gotten up for 2 hours. They are very busy. They said that they have to dress up well and that they will be the miss of Duke Xing's mansion in the future." Yujia curled her lips and said disdainfully. Others didn't know the details of Qin Yuru, but how could they and their servants not know? She was obviously a fake, and she really regarded herself as a noble daughter. "What did Grandma say?" Qin Wanru smiled slightly and said calmly. Yesterday, after Qin Huayong left, she asked Yujia to send a message to Madame Dowager. Madame Dowager said that she will also come later. Yujia reported. This was the news she got this morning. But Qin Wanru nodded. Now they would gather together, and she wanted to see how the show would go on. She cleaned up quickly. After slightly combing her hair, Yujia made a pair of double-ring bun for her and put a pair of pink wreaths on it, which was simple and beautiful. The little servant girl brought the breakfast from the kitchen. Qin Wanru ate it calmly and heard someone in the yard saying that someone from old Madam's side had come. Standing in front of the window, she saw Nanny Yu, who followed old Madam of Duke Xing's mansion, into Qin Yuru's room. After a while, a servant girl came over and asked Qin Wanru to go over. Qin Wanru had already prepared everything. She followed the little servant girl and led Yujia to the upper room. In the room, Qin Yuru had dressed up properly and was sitting upright on the chair in the middle. Her head, which was crooked yesterday, was now straight. However, her face was too pale and she did not look well. However, she was in good spirits. Her gorgeous clothes made her look more delicate than a flower. There were a few hairpins in her hair that held her thick black hair in place. She exuded a noble aura amidst her gentleness. Qin Yuru's appearance could really intimidate people. Qin Wanru looked at Qin Yuru calmly and did not say much. Seeing that Qin Yuru stood up and walked out, she followed Qin Yuru and walked out slowly. Today, Qin Yuru was the protagonist. A group of people went out of the Chuehua gate and went to the flower hall outside. Old Madam sat in the middle of the flower hall with a radiant face. It could be seen that she was in a good mood. On her right side sat several elders, who were invited early in the morning. Behind them stood Madam of Duke Xing. On the other side sat Old Madam of Duke Yong and Old Madam Qin. Beside Old Madam Qin was Qin Huayong. Not many people were invited, but each of them was a key person. Qin Yuru was overjoyed with just a glance. She finally got what she wanted. Glancing at Qin Wanru, Qin Yuru was about to step into the door excitedly. Once she took the step, she would definitely be rich and powerful in the future. Wait a minute. A familiar voice suddenly came to her ears. Qin Yuru looked sideways and was bumped into before she could see clearly who it was. The servant girls on both sides saw that it was bad and reached out to support her. "Sister Yuru, I'm really sorry. I didn't see clearly and accidentally bumped into you." Qi Rongji stood at the door with an apologetic look and a little flustered. It was obvious that she had bumped into Qin Yuru just now. Seeing Qi Rongji's expression, Qin Yuru was angry. She said that she didn't see clearly. Obviously, she did it on purpose. But now there were so many important people sitting inside, Qin Yuru couldn't really fall out with them. She immediately put on a fake smile and said, It doesn't matter. Sister Chi has always been so reckless. Sister Yuru is really tolerant. Chi Rongji also put on a fake smile and said. After that, she stepped into the room first. After coming in, she stood behind old Madam of Duke Xing's mansion and put on a very well-behaved look. Qin Yuru frowned with hatred and suppressed the anger in her eyes. Of course, she would not quarrel with Chi Rongji at this time. Holding the servant girl's hand, she entered the room and gracefully bowed to old Madam. Then she also stood aside. Old Madam looked her up and down with a smile on her face, and then looked at the elders. This is the girl I like. At first glance, I can tell that she is well-educated and polite. Although she is occasionally rude, she will not do anything out of line according to her character. She is often forced to do so. Her words sounded like she was talking about the reason, but the joy on her face had exposed her thoughts. The few clan elders looked at each other and nodded. In fact, they did not have much power. They were just witnesses. Immediately, the oldest one among them nodded and said, "She is indeed a good girl. It's all up to old Madam's command. Then write her down." Old Madam said with a smile. "Which one do you write it under?" The elder, who had benefited from it, naturally nodded and asked. Anyway, old Madam had recognized it, so she could remember which one she wanted to remember. Chi Rongji's face changed with anger. When she was recognized by Madam of Duke Xing as her adopted daughter, she just recognized her and did not record her in the family tree. Looking at Qin Yuru's attitude, it seemed that she was really going to write her down. "Just remember that my eldest son has died. If he was still alive, maybe he would have such a big daughter," old Madam said with a sad face. She stretched out her handkerchief and wiped the corners of her eyes. Her smile was gone. The dead eldest son was the former heir of Duke Xing. As Qin Wanru said, there was something fishy about Qin Yuru's recognition of her relatives this time. Under the name of the former heir of Duke Xing. That's the best. The clan elders nodded and thought this was a good proposal. Since old Madam liked this first miss of Qin's mansion so much, it was indeed appropriate to record her under the name of the former heir of Duke Xing. In terms of status, she was extremely noble. Under the name of the former heir of Duke Xing? The former heir of Duke Xing didn't have such a big daughter, did he? Chi Rongji couldn't bear it anymore and stood out from behind old Madam. Old Madam frowned unhappily. She didn't care whether she liked or disliked Chi Rongji. According to her daughter-in-law, she could only casually recognize Chi Rongji at that time, but it was just a helpless move. In the past, she didn't let Chi Rongji come to pay respects to her, but Chi Rongji was very polite and always came to her, looking very filial. But this was just the appearance. Old Madam had met many people, so how could she not understand Chi Rongji's meaning? In the past, she didn't like Chi Rongji very much, but just maintained a gentle appearance. Now seeing Chi Rongji jump out, she became more and more unhappy. She wanted to recognize her granddaughter, but what did it have to do with Chi Rongji? What she was doing here? At this time, it was not only old Madam who frowned, but also several others present. Madam Dowager of Qin's mansion was the calmest. Her eyes fell on Chi Rongji's face, and she looked at her calmly without saying anything. This was Duke Xing's mansion, and it was not her turn to speak. Zhuozhuo said that she only needed to watch a good show and be a witness. "Rongji, leave now." "What nonsense are you talking about?" Madam of Duke Xing also looked unhappy and scolded. "Mother, first Miss Qin is 15 years old now, and she passed the coming-of-age ceremony before the Spring Festival. When she was in Jiangzhou, she married my elder brother after the coming-of-age ceremony. But because she wanted to find a higher position, she took advantage of Qin Wanru's childish nature and let her get on the bridal sedan chair instead of her. Later, she made a scandal that she secretly met my elder brother after breaking off the engagement. She had no choice but to stay in Jiangzhou, so she hurried to the capital city. Although Chi Rongji was afraid of Madam of Duke Xing, she was more afraid that Qin Yuru would steal her favor, so she immediately told her what had happened in Jiangzhou in detail. Hearing her words, the elders all looked at Qin Yuru in astonishment. They almost didn't believe that such a shameless girl was the one that old Madam in front of them liked. They had accepted old Madam's money before, So they certainly did things according to old Madam's order. It had nothing to do with them whether Duke Xing's mansion accepted a granddaughter or not. But when he heard Qi Rongji's words, his expression immediately turned cold. If this was true, it could bring disaster to the entire Xiao clan. The reputation of the women of Xiao family might be affected when the girl in front of them was recorded in the family tree. What nonsense are you talking about? Old Madam was furious and shouted. Old Madam, I'm not talking nonsense. If you don't believe me, I have 2 witnesses here. You can see them. Qi Rongji suppressed the panic in her heart and said, last night, she not only stole the material evidence, but also brought 2 witnesses from her mansion. They were servants brought by Qi Tianyu from Jiangzhou, and they knew clearly about the things between Qi Tianyu and Qin Yuru. When she arrived, Qi Tianyu was not there, so she went into Qi Tianyu's study and rummaged around. She said that she was looking for some books, but she turned the study upside down. Qi Tianyu's servant originally didn't want to let her in, but she said that she was looking for a very important book. If it was missing, they would be held responsible, so the servant had no choice but to let her in. After Qi Rongji found the material evidence she wanted, she took the 2 important servants away, saying that they could help deal with some affairs. At this time, she came prepared. Although she was a little scared, she didn't panic. Qi Rongji, don't talk nonsense. Where did you get the witnesses? Hearing this, Qin Yuru immediately knew that it was not good. The dignified look on her face was immediately disordered, and she turned pale with fright. The thing in Jiangzhou was a bad tumor in her root, and she was most afraid of people mentioning it. Chapter 423. There were 2 people standing in the hall. They were 2 servants sent from Jiangzhou. Qin Yuru's expression changed drastically when she saw their faces. Qin Yuru was not the only one who changed her expression. Qin Wanru's eyes swept across the people who had changed their expressions, and her eyes became darker. The people who had changed their expressions had their own plans. They had thought that they were about to get what they wanted, but they did not expect Qi Rongji to appear and disrupt their plans. Sister Yuru, don't tell me you don't know them. Qi Rongji stared at Qin Yuru's face and smiled coldly. First miss, don't tell me you really don't know me. My mother tried to push the blame of your marriage to second Mississippi. I secretly sent a message to the first young master of the Qi family, saying that second miss robbed you of your marriage and you were the victim. She also hinted to the first young master of the Qi family to avenge you and ruin second miss's reputation. My mother and I were so loyal to you, but you beat my mother to death and wanted to silence me. A girl kneeling on the ground raised her head. She was about 17 or 18 years old, and the most eye-catching thing about her was the scar on her forehead. It ran from her forehead to the right side of her cheek, almost disfiguring her entire face. Even so, the girl's pretty eyes and brows could still be vaguely seen. Xishang. Qin Yuru covered her mouth with a handkerchief and said in a trembling voice. Xishang was the daughter of Nanny Fong, who was in charge of Qin Wanru's courtyard. She was the second-class servant girl in Qin Yuru's courtyard. Qin Wanru's eyes swept across Xishang's face calmly, and a trace of ridicule flashed across her eyes. After Nanny Fong's accident, she had thought of looking for Nanny Fong's daughter to get some more useful evidence from her. Unexpectedly, she found out that Xishang had accidentally fallen into the river and drowned. The river was very fast, and many people had drowned in Jiangzhou. Moreover, she was just a second-class servant girl, so it was fine that the master did not pursue the matter. Qin Wanru had suspected such a coincidence at the beginning, but she had few useful people around her, so she couldn't find out the truth for a while, and then left it unsettled. Now it seemed that when Nanny Fong was in trouble, Qin Yuru also took action. But to her surprise, this servant girl was saved by the people of Qi's mansion. It seemed that Qi Tianyu even brought her to the capital. Qi Tianyu already knew the inside story, but he still pretended to be tactful with Qin Yuru. No one knew what he was plotting. Does eldest miss find it strange that this servant is still alive? At that time, eldest miss sent people to deceive me to the river and wanted to take my life. Unfortunately, I was lucky enough to survive. My mother and I wholeheartedly wanted to harm second miss for eldest miss, but in the end we ended up like this. It's all retribution, but isn't eldest miss afraid of being struck by lightning? Shixiang raised her head and looked at Qin Yuru with hatred. Her voice was not loud, but every word she said was sharp. Her hatred was so cold that it almost hit Qin Yuru hard. Qin Yuru took 2 steps back, swayed, and almost couldn't stand, and her face was as pale as snow. Old Madam of Duke Yong's mansion's fingers were trembling. Although she loved her granddaughter Qin Yuru, she also loved Di Yan. At this time, she found that her granddaughter was really, as the rumor said, almost married to the first young master of Qi's mansion. Moreover, according to the servant girl's words, the two of them also had a very ambiguous relationship in private. His face first turned green, then white, and then red from his anger. No matter how biased she was, she knew that Qin Yuru really had an affair with Qi Tianyu, and she felt sorry for her grandson. Originally, as Qin Yuru's grandmother, she should scold Shixiang at this time and stop her from talking, but as Di Yan's grandmother, she really wanted to hear the truth. After Di Yan and Qin Yuru came to the capital, they all told her about the past in Jiangzhou. Old Madam of Duke Yong's mansion once told her about the past in Jiangzhou. They all said that it was fake, and it was the past between Qin Wanru and Qi Tianyu, and had nothing to do with Qin Yuru. It was just that some people didn't know the names of the two sisters, so they spread false rumors. Old Madam of Duke Yong's mansion naturally believed in her daughter and granddaughter whom she hadn't seen for many years. Unexpectedly, the truth turned out to be like this. Thinking of Di Yan crying in front of her and asking to break off the engagement, Old Madam of Duke Yong's mansion felt sorry for her grandson. Now she didn't know whether she should stop Qin Yuru or not. She could only gnash her teeth and continue to listen. At this time, she was thinking about how to explain it to Di Yan. At this time, she felt lucky that Countess Yong had something to do today and didn't come. Otherwise, after hearing this, she would definitely not let Qin Yuru marry into the mansion. You bitch, how dare you frame me like this? Qin Yuru was so anxious that she almost couldn't breathe. She gritted her teeth and said, "If you frame the old master, you will be beaten to death after being sent to the official." Madam of Duke Xing said sternly on the side. "This servant has already died once. This servant's mother was beaten to death. All of this is a generous gift from eldest Mississippi. This servant will never forget it." Shixiang sneered and said with hatred. There was a trace of blood at the bottom of her eyes. Both her words and her expression showed that she hated Qin Yuru very much. She reached out and took out a letter from her bosom. This is the letter that the first miss asked to meet the first young master of the Qi family. In fact, this letter was not hidden by Shixiang at that time. It was found by Qi Rongji from Qi Tianyu's study this time. When they were in Jiangzhou, Qin Yuru and Qi Tianyu were in love with each other. Although the two families had formed an alliance, it was not easy for unmarried men and women to meet each other. It was normal for them to write some letters with deep feelings in private. Sometimes they avoided meeting the adults in the mansion and wrote letters to meet each other. At that time, Qin Yuru also wrote a letter to meet Qi Tianyu out of habit. In order to prevent Qi Tianyu from misunderstanding her, she deliberately wrote a lot of bad things about Qin Yuru in the letter. On the one hand, she said that she wanted to meet Qi Tianyu very much, but because Qin Yuru robbed her of her marriage, she fell ill and couldn't recover. On the other hand, she said that she missed Qi Tianyu very much. She wrote a lot of words with affection. Although she didn't directly resent Qin Wanru, her words were full of self-reproach and even a sense of self-abandonment. She implied that if she couldn't marry Qi Tianyu, she would have no love in life and it would be difficult for her to be happy in the future. And it was Qin Wanru who caused all this. "Old Madam, look at this letter." Qi Rongji took the letter from Shixiang and proudly handed it to Old Madam of Duke Xing's mansion. She didn't expect that she would gain so much. "Old Madam, these letters are all fake. This servant girl was indeed my former servant girl, but later she was beaten and sold by me because of something. I didn't expect that she would hold a grudge against me and now frame me." Although Qin Yuru wanted to grab the letter, she also knew that she couldn't really act rashly. "Framed you? Sister Yuru, it's good that you don't frame others. My brother's reputation is ruined by you." Qi Rongji sneered mercilessly and handed the letter in her hand to Nanny Yu. Nanny Yu silently took it and handed it to old Madam of Duke Xing's mansion, who was sitting on the high seat. Old Madam of Duke Xing's mansion reached out to take it. After reading it carefully, she handed it to old Madam of Duke Yong's mansion beside her with a very ugly face. After old Madam of Duke Yong's mansion read it, her face turned blue and red, and she was ashamed and angry at the same time. If Qin Yuru wasn't her biological granddaughter, and if Madame D wasn't in such a situation now, she almost couldn't help throwing the letter to Qin Yuru's face. Old Madam of Duke Yong's mansion held the paper tightly with trembling fingers. At this moment, even the experienced and knowledgeable old Madam of Duke Yong didn't know what she should do. She wanted to destroy the letter, but she also knew that if she did so, people would think that she was trying to cover it up. Her identity didn't allow her to do such a thing. She glanced sideways at a trusted old maid standing behind her and winked. The trusted old maid understood and took a step forward to take the paper and tear it. The master couldn't tear it, but the servants could. After tearing it, they could put the blame on the servant girl. The letter didn't fall into the hands of the old maid. Another hand quickly took the letter from old Madam of Duke Yong's mansion. Old Madam, after reading it, let our Madam Dowager have a look. Yu Jia said with a smile and reached out to hand the paper to old Madam Qin. Qin Wanru had asked her to keep an eye on old Madam of Duke Yong for fear that she would destroy the evidence. Old Madam Qin read it calmly, sighed heavily, and handed the letter to Qin Huaiyong. Qin Huaiyong's face was very ugly. After reading 10 lines at a glance, he slammed the letter in his hand on the table and shouted, "Unfilial girl, how dare you do this? Father, this letter is really not written by me. Someone deliberately imitated my handwriting. How could I write such a letter?" Qin Yuru covered her face and burst into tears. "Not written by you?" Old Madam of Duke Yong's mansion rolled her eyes and suddenly felt that she was alive again. "Grandma, of course, this letter is not written by me. I don't know what Sister Rongji means. Why does she treat me like this? Is it because I am favored by old Madam? If so, then I don't recognize you as my relative. Sister Rongji, please let me go." Qin Yuru turned around in tears and knelt down in front of Qi Rongji. Tears fell down one by one, and she looked very sad. She clearly knew that she could not admit it at this time. If she refused to admit it, she didn't believe that Qi Rongji could do anything to her. The letter could be forged, and the witness could deliberately frame her. At this moment, Qin Yuru's mind was unprecedentedly clear. The biggest hatred between her and Qi Rongji was that she was going to become the adopted granddaughter of old Madam of Duke Xing's mansion. Qi Rongji was afraid that she would steal old Madam's favor, so she exposed the past at all costs. She bet that Qi Rongji could not take out other evidence except this evidence that could be forged. Most of the people present were on her side. As long as she insisted, she didn't believe that Qi Rongji could do anything to her. Chapter 424. Sister Yuru, it's just a servant girl. You said that I framed you. Then what about the official document? Did I frame you too? Qi Rongji sneered and shattered Qin Yuru's fantasy. Previously, you lied that you were 13 years old and asked your mother to send someone to write a letter to my mother. You wanted to change your household registration in Jiangzhou to 13 years old. You said that you had made a mistake in your age. My mother was careful and copied down the page that you changed. Qin Yuru's eyes lit up. Qi Rongji nodded to a servant standing behind Shixiang. The servant in his 20s hurriedly presented a letter in his hand. Qi Rongji took it, waved it in her hand and said proudly, "This is the original letter written by Madame D to my mother." "Qin Yuru, you won't say that this is forged again, will you?" Old Madam of Duke Xing's mansion, who was sitting in the first seat, couldn't sit still anymore. This was not an ordinary thing. It was related to the officials. Although it was not a big deal to change a girl's age, this kind of thing could be big or small. If it was brought up in a big way, it might lead to a big deal. What the hell is going on? Qin Huaiyong also couldn't sit still. "Uncle, you will know the authenticity of this letter after reading it." Qi Rongji handed the letter in her hand to Qin Huaiyong. Qin Huaiyong opened the letter in his hand. The more he read, the more his face changed. Father, these are all fake. They are all fake. It is Qi Rongji who framed me. Father, you won't listen to an outsider and believe her words, right? Qin Yuru didn't expect that Qi Rongji had such a thing. Household registration was not something that could be easily obtained. She cried and said, Ningyuan Army General, can I have a look? Madam of Duke Xing looked up at Qin Huaiyong and said. Nanny Xing hurried over. Qin Huaiyong handed the letter to Nanny Xing with a livid face. Nanny Xing took it, turned around, walked to Madam of Duke Xing, and handed the letter to her. Qin Wanru turned sideways and glanced at Madam of Duke Xing's face silently. There was coldness in her eyes. As expected, when it came to age, she couldn't sit still anymore. Qin Yuru's reputation didn't matter much to Madam of Duke Xing as long as it didn't interfere with her business. However, Madam of Duke Xing had to pay attention to Qin Yuru's age. If their ages didn't match, it would definitely ruin her plans. The corners of her mouth lifted silently. She lowered her head again and gently rubbed the handkerchief in her hand. This matter was getting more and more lively. She wanted to see how they would continue to be lively. My maternal grandmother should be here soon. The hall was full of people. Apart from her grandmother, who was sincerely on her side, everyone else had their own considerations. In the end, she needed strong support. Madam of Duke Xing frowned and finished reading the letter in her hand. She raised her head and looked at Qi Rongji's face coldly. She said with a sad face, Rongji, why did you do this? Mother, what do you mean? Qi Rongji suddenly had a bad feeling. This was different from what she had imagined. Why did you frame up Yuru? Is it because she will also become the miss of Duke Xing's mansion? I heard that when you were in Jiangzhou, you were also a pair of best friends. Why did you fight with each other like this? You are my adopted daughter, and Yuru is old madam's adopted granddaughter. In fact, you will not contradict each other. I will still love you, and so will old madam. Why did you take it so hard and do this? Madam of Duke Xing's face was full of sadness, but her expression was cold. Mother, I didn't. It's true. It's all true. If you don't believe it, you can check. Qi Rongji was shocked and screamed. Things changed too fast. Before coming, Qi Rongji had already thought of the people she would face today, including Qin Yuru and people from Duke Yong's mansion. But she didn't expect to face Madam of Duke Xing. At this time, shouldn't Madam of Duke Xing deal with this matter fairly? Why did she feel that Madam of Duke Xing was trying hard to protect Qin Yuru? Qin Yuru was liked by old Madam, not by Madam of Duke Xing. Why did Madam of Duke Xing protect her so much? Check what? Go to Jiangzhou to check? Rongji, well, I know what you did today is because you are jealous that Yuru is favored by old Madam. Don't worry. From now on, you and Yuru will call each other sisters. Just let it go. It's just a child's trifle. If it gets serious, it will make old Madam unhappy. Madam of Duke Xing interrupted Qi Rongji's words and said. She seemed to turn a big problem into a small one and a small one into nothing, which meant that Qi Rongji was not sensible and made a scene to fight for old Madam's favor. It was not a big deal. But there was also a bit of threat in her words. In Duke Xing's mansion, old Madam's words carried enormous weight. If Qi Rongji offended old Madam, she would not have a good ending. The clan elders looked at each other. Was this really the truth of the matter? Just now, neither old Madam of Duke Xing's mansion nor Qin Huaiyong showed the evidence in their hands to the elders. Until now, they couldn't tell whether it was true or not. But they thought it couldn't be fake since it caused such a big scene. Sister Rongji, apologize to my big sister. After that, you are still good sisters, and you can get along well with each other in the future. Qin Wanru suddenly persuaded her in a natural and unrestrained manner. She looked at the group of people coldly and knew that it was time for her to speak. Sisters getting along? Reconcile with Qin Yuru and her sister? Today, they had already fallen out with each other. How could they reconcile with Qin Yuru and her sister? Qi Rongji's panic-stricken and bewildered expressions suddenly became firm. Others might not know Qin Yuru's temperament, but Qi Rongji was not so naive. She had known Qin Yuru for a long time, so how could she not know Qin Yuru's vicious nature? If he missed this opportunity, he would really die without a burial ground. Before Qin Yuru married into Duke Xing's mansion, old Madam of Duke Xing liked her and Madam of Duke Xing protected her. If Qin Yuru really recognized Qin Yuru as a member of Duke Xing's mansion and was recorded in the family tree, how could she let Qi Rongji live? Mother, it's not that I don't want to listen to you, but Qin Yuru is too vicious. I don't know what she wants to do. She shows that she is not the daughter of Madame D, and then she wants to change her age. Now the princes haven't chosen a wife. I don't know whether Qin Yuru does this because of this. I heard that she deliberately went to Prince Cheng's mansion to seduce Prince Cheng. If the royal family is in trouble because of this, Rongji can't bear the responsibility. Qi Rongji thought of the words she occasionally heard from the two servants before and immediately said harshly. Hearing her words, everyone in the hall changed their expressions. This matter was extremely terrifying when they thought about it carefully. Which young lady would change her age for no reason? Unless there was a special reason. Changing her age to marry into the royal family and it was disadvantageous to the royal family? Several clan elders panicked. Qin Yuru would be recorded in the family tree. If something happened to her, the whole Shao clan would be implicated. If this matter was related to the chaos in the Imperial harem, the whole Shao clan would not be able to escape. Old Madam, this matter needs to be investigated carefully. Old Madam, it's better not to record her under the name of the former heir of Duke Xing. If something really happens to her, I'm afraid the whole Shao clan will be affected. Old Madam, this matter needs to be considered at length. Several clan elders immediately stood up and hurriedly tried to persuade her. Previously, they thought it was just a formality, but now they found that it was not a small matter. Even if Duke Xing's mansion was powerful, they might not be able to bear it. The clan elders did not dare to be a bystander anymore. This matter was related to their own lives. They saw what happened just now. No matter how they saw it, there was something wrong with the first miss of Qin's mansion. She not only had a bad character but also behaved suspiciously. This was not recognizing her as a relative, but following her into trouble. Old Madam of Duke Xing frowned tightly and did not say a word. Things had come to this point, which was completely beyond her expectation. Did she change her age for that purpose? Qi Rongji, don't slander me. Everything is fabricated by you just to prevent me from recognizing Old Madam as my grandmother. You? How can you be so evil? Qin Yuru was shocked and said angrily. Sister Yuru, do you know how old I am? Qi Rongji sneered. Who doesn't know that you are 13 years old? Qin Yuru said harshly. Yes, but I have always called you sister, and you have called me sister just now. Qi Rongji said. Qin Yuru felt guilty for a moment, but she immediately bluffed and said, So what? There is still a difference between people of the same age. Of course, she could not say that her real age was 15 years old at this time. Yes, there is a difference between people of the same age. But the age that Sister Yuru changed is exactly 1 month younger than me. Moreover, everyone in Jiangzhou knows that you have to get on the bridal sedan chair when you marry my elder brother. Let me ask you, if you are really only 13 years old, how can you marry my elder brother? Qi Rongji threw caution to the wind at this time and pretended not to see Madame of Duke Xing's gloomy face. There were many people who got married at the age of 13, but it was rare to get married at the age of 13 without special circumstances. Everyone loved their daughter and wanted to stay with her for a few more years. I don't know why mother did this. Qin Yuru covered her face and cried. She meant that Madame D did not love her, so she let her get married early. At this time, she only felt that Qi Rongji's words were good for her. If she wanted to become the real miss of Duke Xing's mansion, she must let others think that Madame D did not treat her well and thought that she was not her biological daughter. Qi Rongji's words gave her an opportunity. But what she said was equivalent to admitting what Shi Xiang had said before. She and Qi Tianyu did have an ambiguous relationship, and they were indeed talking about marriage. Old Madame of Duke Yong's mansion could not sit still. She could pretend that everything was fake and she did not know what Qin Yuru said, but now Qin Yuru almost admitted it. She clenched her fists under her sleeves and looked at Qin Yuru with disappointment. When she was about to remind her, She heard a cold snort from outside. You mean Madam D is not your biological mother? Then who is your biological mother? Chapter 425. There was a group of people at the door, and Ruyan Great Elder Princess was among them. Seeing the angry Ruyan Great Elder Princess, Madame of Duke Xing felt that something was wrong. She hurriedly lowered her head and gave some instructions to Nanny Sheng. Nanny Sheng secretly retreated with an extremely ugly face. She didn't expect to use the backup plan that First Miss and Madame had planned, but this was not the best time. At this time, everyone looked at the door. Except for Qin Wanru, no one noticed that Nanny Sheng had left quietly. Old Madame of Duke Xing's mansion stood up. And Great Elder Princess had not entered the gate of Duke Xing's mansion for several years. Even if she wanted to see her grandson, and Great Elder Princess would take her away. This time she came with bad intentions. With a cold face, and Great Elder Princess glanced at everyone present and sneered. Before Old Madame of Duke Xing's mansion invited her, she stepped in and sat in the first seat of the guest seat. Old Madame of Duke Yong's mansion, who had been sitting in this seat, could only step back. All the people stepped back, but no one dared to sit down. However, Old Madame of Duke Xing slowly sat down and looked at Ruyan Great Elder Princess with disgust. She calmed down after taking a deep breath. One of the important reasons why she didn't like her daughter-in-law was that she didn't like her daughter-in-law's mother. Ruyan Great Elder Princess dared to look down on her in the name of Great Elder Princess, which was really annoying. Old Madame rarely felt this kind of annoyance from others. Except for her eldest daughter-in-law, only Ruyan Great Elder Princess in front of her and Qin Wanru, who had just met her. Even if Qin Wanru saved her life, this feeling of disgust could not fade away. She inexplicably disliked Qin Wanru and felt uncomfortable when she saw her. Old Madame thought that this was mainly because Qin Wanru's previous behavior made her feel disgusted. She was greedy and disobeyed the elder's words, which was really unpleasant. Great Elder Princess rarely comes here. What a rare guest. Served to. Old Madame of Duke Xing's mansion calmed down and showed a smile on her face. Ruyan Great Elder Princess had a noble status, so she didn't dare to offend her casually. Madame of Duke Xing gestured to the servant girl beside her. The servant girl hurriedly brought in a cup of tea and respectfully placed it in front of Ruyan Great Elder Princess. Qin Wanru took a deep look at Old Madame and lowered her head quietly. Her long eyelashes fluttered once or twice like thick fans to cover the depth at the bottom of her eyes. Grandma came at the right time. He finally had someone who could make decisions for him. If I didn't come, would I have to recognize a fake granddaughter? The Great Elder Princess snorted. Pretending to be a relative of the emperor is a capital crime. Qin Yuru had been held aside. At this time, she couldn't help shivering and looked at Madame of Duke Xing in panic. Madame of Duke Xing raised her head calmly. Her cold eyes fell on Qin Yuru's face and she smiled at her. Qin Yuru was so scared that she hurriedly turned her head to avoid her eyes. She held Mei Shui's wrist tightly and her face was as pale as snow. Great Elder Princess, why do you say so? It's just a nominal granddaughter under the name of the eldest son. The eldest son used to like girls. If he has a daughter, he will like her even in the netherworld. Old Madame of Duke Xing's mansion said lightly. Infanta Qinghua had royal blood, but after a woman got married, the surname of the child would be the surname of the husband. Even if the child was not a member of the bride's family, it was just a nominal granddaughter. So there was no need to inform Ruyan Great Elder Princess. Recorded under the name of the heir of the duke, then whose name is the biological mother? I don't remember that the heir of the duke has other concubines. Ruyan Great Elder Princess sneered. Since it was recorded in the family tree, there must be a biological father and a biological mother. The eldest son also had a servant at the beginning. He wanted to promote her to be a concubine, so he recorded her name in the family tree. Later, when Infanta Qinghua married, he moved away. Let's record her name. Old Madame of Duke Xing's mansion said. If Ruyan Great Elder Princess did not come, of course, it would be recorded under the name of Infanta Qinghua. But now Ruyan Great Elder Princess came, so they had to change the name. Why don't I know that the heir of the duke has a servant girl? And great elder princess said. He did have one before, but later, when Infanta Qinghua married, he moved her away. Old Madam of Duke Xing's mansion said calmly. In fact, there was such a person, but it was not prepared early. Old Madam gave it to her after she heard that her son disregarded her wishes and went to ask for an imperial edict. In order to disgust Infanta Qinghua, Old Madam also asked someone to record her name in the family tree. She only said that as soon as Infanta Qinghua married, she would be promoted to be a concubine. In order to avoid trouble in the future, she was directly recorded as a concubine in the family tree. However, her son didn't care about the servant girl at all. Later, she was thrown into the farthest corner and locked up. Later, the servant girl couldn't help but escape and disappeared. Later, Old Madam also realized that it must be her son's trick, so she directly let her go. Later, she went to check the servant girl's contract and found that she had left long ago. For this reason, Old Madam also severely beat the heir of the duke, but now she pretended that there had been such a thing. So, it should still be recorded in the name of the heir of the duke, or should my daughter be the mother? Ruth and great elder princess didn't argue with Old Madam of Duke Xing's mansion about this, but just asked coldly. No matter whose name was recorded, Infanta Qinghua would bear the title of the mistress. It was not easy for Old Madam of Duke Xing's mansion to answer. After thinking for a while, she slowly said, "If and great elder princess thinks so, it's okay." Great elder princess, don't be angry. This matter should indeed be discussed with you. But you have been unwilling to take care of the affairs of our mansion for so many years, so we don't want to bother you with this small matter. That's why we didn't inform you. Madam of Duke Xing said with a flattering smile on her side. Since Infanta Qinghua bore the title of the mistress, no matter from which aspect, it was necessary to inform and great elder princess. In this matter, Duke Xing's mansion was in the wrong. Seeing that it was not good, Madam of Duke Xing hurriedly stepped forward to remedy it. Discuss with me? Discuss what? Accept an impostor? And great elder princess's smile became colder and colder. She glanced at Madam of Duke Xing with disdain on her face. Like old Madam of Duke Xing's mansion, and great elder princess disliked the pair of mother-in-law and daughter-in-law in front of her the most. They behaved differently on the surface and behind their backs, which was really annoying. Great elder princess, I just want to accept an adopted granddaughter. How can there be an impostor? Although old Madam was unhappy in her heart, she only showed a trace of helplessness on her face. She just wanted to accept an adopted granddaughter, and it was not a real bloodline inheritance, so it didn't matter whether she was an impostor or not. Old Madam thought that as long as she recognized her as her biological granddaughter, it didn't matter whether and great elder princess recognized her or not. Anyway, her son's bloodline had been found, and she had done her son justice. Originally, she didn't want and great elder princess to know this matter, because she was afraid that she would make trouble. Do I need to change my household registration to accept an adopted granddaughter? Do I need to know that she is not Madame D's biological daughter to accept an adopted granddaughter? Do I need to go to Jiangzhou for such a long time to find such a qualified granddaughter? Old Madam, do you really think I am easy to be deceived? Seeing that Old Madam was still concealing it, and great elder princess flew into a rage. Okay, let's go to the palace now and ask Empress Dowager and Empress to judge. Duke Xing's mansion sent people out in the name of finding a biological daughter for heir of Duke Xing and my daughter, but now you found an impostor. Duke Xing's mansion was afraid that the impostor's conditions did not match, so you deliberately changed her birth date and 8 characters. Duke Xing's mansion should bear the crime of deceiving the emperor. Thinking that her daughter was forced to leave by this pair of mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, and great elder princess trembled with anger. She raised her daughter like a pearl and finally ended up like this. How could she not feel distressed? In the past, there was no evidence, but today it was different. Her biological granddaughter was beside her. Since she recognized Qin Wanru, and great elder princess had not been idle. She listened to her granddaughter's orders and waited for such a day. She had prepared a lot of evidence in her hands. How could her granddaughter be imposter? The crime of deceiving the monarch? The faces of several clan elders became very ugly, and they all regretted coveting the money of Duke Xing's mansion. If this was really the crime of deceiving the monarch, the entire Shao family would be implicated. Qin Wanru glanced at Qin Huaiyong, who looked calm. Since Ru and great elder princess came in, although his face was not good, he was still calm. Compared with other people, Qin Huaiyong was the calmest one. But the calmer he was, the colder Qin Wanru's eyes were. Did father really know nothing? Was Madame D really so powerful? Did Qin Huaiyong really know nothing? Did her biological father really leave without leaving a word? Madame D had no affection for her, but what about Qin Huaiyong? His biological father had saved his life. Could it be that he really didn't have any feelings for him? Her hands trembled slightly, and her heart beat suddenly. It was a little painful. She had raised him for so long in the last life and this life. Even if there was no affection before, what about after? In the last life, when she fell into that miserable situation, she did not see Qin Huaiyong do anything. It seemed that everything was done by Madame D and her daughter, and he saw nothing. Had he really been blinded by her? In the last life, Qin Huaiyong's official position was promoted again, and his career was very successful. Was he really a muddle-headed person in family affairs? Did Madame D cover the truth with one hand, and Qin Huaiyong did not have any doubt? There were too many questions hidden in her heart, but every more doubts made her heart hurt more. She took a deep breath, suppressed the pain in her heart, and looked up again, only to see coldness. A debt of blood must be paid in blood. She would get to the bottom of it. Oh, madam, there are people outside, saying that they are looking for second Miss Qin. An old maid came in a hurry. Seeing so many people in the flower hall, she was stunned for a moment, but she still said to Madame of Duke Xing timidly, "How did they come here? This is not Qin's mansion." Madame of Duke Xing answered unhappily. No one was in the mood to receive other people at this time. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.